starting with the videotaping that's being broadcast, and then he'll be able to finish up with you after we go forward. So. So welcome everyone to today's community workshop on the topic of Morro Bay's wastewater and water opportunities. I'm pleased to be interviewing at the start here Joe Mueller, who is the utility manager here in Morro Bay. Joe's going to be telling us a little bit about what you'd be seeing at his information station here around the topic of why the city needs a new plant and why it needs to be relocated. So Joe, if you take the mic and share with us what is it about the plant that requires that it be rehabilitated, be modernized, that a new plant be created?
Okay, yeah, so the existing treatment plant initially was constructed in 1954, upgraded somewhat in 1964, so it's very old technology. Expanded again in the 80s, but to a modified secondary standards. Today's secondary standards means 30 milligrams per liter of solids allowed to be discharged and 30 milligrams per liter of food, organic matter, to be discharged. So this treatment plant that we're currently operating was designed around 120 milligrams per liter of organic matter being allowed to discharge and 70 milligrams per liter of solids to be discharged. So the treatment plant itself was never designed to meet these new stringent treatment requirements. The city received a new discharge permit in March of this year that has these more strict discharge requirements on it. So we are currently under a time schedule order from the regional board, which will allow us to continue to discharge under the old requirements while we pursue and build a new treatment plant.
Great. So can you just share with your graph here why it is that the current plant can't handle what the water board is requiring?
So again, the treatment plant never was designed to actually meet those new strict requirements, but one of the key components why we can't meet those new requirements are the flow. Right now, our secondary treatment process is limited hydraulically to 1 million gallons a day. Routinely, our treatment plant receives more than 1 million gallons a day with just Morro Bay flows. It is a jointly operated or a jointly owned treatment plant right now between the city of Morro Bay and Cayucas, but this graph actually represents only flows from Morro Bay. We've calculated out all the Cayucas flows, and as you can see, during the wet weather period, everything above the red line is 1 million gallons a day hydraulically. Everything over the line during the wet period doesn't receive any secondary treatment at all, allowing it to get to those lower standards. So that's in the wet period. During the dry months, our 4th of July's high visitor serving weekends, we routinely go over the 1 million gallons a day. So that treatment only receives primary treatment, which means it goes into a big tank. What's heavy settles to the bottom, what's light floats to the top. The rest of it gets chlorinated, disinfected, and sent out to the ocean. And it's mixed with the secondary treatment. So that would be a violation of our permit as it currently sits, our new city permit.
So let's turn to why it is that a new plant can't be located at the current plant site. What have you learned from the Coastal Commission? How are you responding to that?
So the biggest concerns of keeping the treatment plant at the existing site is coastal hazards. So back in December of 2013, the Coastal Commission unanimously denied permit to upgrade the facility at the existing site or build a new treatment plant at the existing site, due to the compatibility for the coastal environment and coastal hazards. Coastal hazards meaning flooding from tsunami events, that type of stuff. Again, we look back at the potential going back to the Coastal Commission with some engineering and try and mitigate for those coastal hazards. And right around that September 2017, the Coastal Commission again came back and strongly encouraged us to move the plant off the coastal zone, off the beach area, and inland to mitigate those coastal hazards.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Joe. And thanks for all the work that you do to keep the current plant running while a new one gets planned. So we're trying to bring you around for the viewing audience at home to the different stations that are here and a little preview of what's going to be covered today. So if you're sitting at home and wondering about getting involved, we encourage you to come on down. We're going to be starting with the formal presentations at 1:50, and there's lots of opportunity for public engagement throughout this workshop. We want to make it an opportunity for you to be actively involved in these discussions. So we're going to go next to a discussion down here about the existing facilities and what it is that is being done to manage these facilities effectively. So we're on the air here with Rob Livick, who is the Director of Public Works for the City of Morro Bay. If you'll hold on to the microphone, Rob.
Sure,
thanks. So, Rob, would you describe, a lot of people have been asking, well, why can't we just get what we've got fixed up and made better, and what's being done to make what you have better, especially around the collection system? Could you describe that just briefly for people?
Sure. So this is a zoom into the north area of town, showing our collection system. We have about 60 miles of pipeline located in the city of Morro Bay underneath all the streets. It was put in basically from the time Morro Bay developed to present day. And much of it was put in the 50s and 60s. So it's had a useful life, and it, as with all infrastructure, it wears. So we have some issues with our sewer system in town. Mainly the north area where the underlying soil type is clay. Being that it's clay, it's subject to shrink and swell. So as the water gets into the ground, it swells, and as the water leaves the ground, it dries out, it shrinks, so it causes some movement, which the movement of the ground causes cracks in the pipe. Those cracks in the pipe allow water to inflow into the system. We have recently prepared a new capital facilities plan for both wastewater and water to identify capacity issues and problem areas. So over the next 20 years, we'll be executing that capital facility program and repairing pipes. Now, it's not that we didn't do repairs over the past history, so we've done many repairs in the system. Every day, our sewer crews are out working on our system, either cleaning it or inspecting it or facilitating repairs. We line coat manholes. We make sure as new housing develops, they repair their sewer lateral connections. So that's an ongoing process of maintaining our sewer collection system. Likewise, with the water system, we've identified many projects around town that need to be, pipelines that need to be upsized due to growth, and then also we need to replace aging infrastructure. For example, our Nutmeg tank up at the end of Nutmeg Street is about 100,000 gallon tank that needs to be replaced with a 1 million gallon tank because of changes in fire flow requirements, and the town is developed. So we need that storage to provide fire protection and serve the community.
One of the things I've been hearing, Rob, is from the community is that they're concerned that, if you got rid of the inflow and the infiltration, you wouldn't have the capacity problems that you have in the plant. And I think you brought along with you some equipment here that you actually use to test these things out, so that and tell the audience, what your point of view is about the inflow and infiltration, and is that driving the need for the plant? Could you just fix the pipes and not have to do a new plant, or are you beyond capacity regardless?
Sure. First of all, this is a flow meter that goes inside of a sewer line. This device gets placed in the sewer line and is connected to this reader that measures the actual flow in the pipes. So we've placed these throughout the system so we can measure the exact amount of flow that goes to the plant, and identify the flow from Morro Bay alone without Cayucas. As I previously stated, we need to repair our pipes due to water coming in them. That's the inflow and infiltration. The inflow is water that comes in through illicit connections. Some roof drains, rainwater gets into the pipes. And then infiltration is when the groundwater gets above the pipes, it comes in through those cracks. That is a process that continually happens. Pipes break and we'll continue to repair them.
Okay.
In addition to that, we experience flows above the capacity of our plant on a daily basis. So we exceed that 1 million gallons a day, even when it's dry, because of influx of transient populations. Our tourist community comes here. So even if we were to repair every pipe in town, we would start over again once we did that. And then it doesn't solve the problem of the dry weather peak flows that exceed the plant capacity during dry weather and high tourist demand.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to be hearing more from Rob a little bit later with some more details about these questions. So this is an initial preview for our viewing audience. Thank you so much, Rob. So we're turning now on the live video to Erika Saris, and Eric is the project director for the wastewater reclamation facility. He's from Corolla Engineers, long history as a professional engineer in dealing with projects of this nature. Eric, could you just very briefly for us, for the audience as a preview for the presentation we'll be doing in more detail later, discuss how it is that the staff working with the rate consultants and others created the rates that are going to be discussed today?
Okay, great. Yeah, so there's that I wanted to talk about real quickly. One would be the role of the Blue Ribbon Commission. So back in April, the city manager appointed 4 individuals from the city that have experience with business and running their own businesses and finance. Convened them, and they've been intimately involved in this process since we started. We've had more than half a dozen meetings with them. They've been reviewing the capital cost estimates for the project, O&M budgets for now and in the future, as well as capital improvement programs that were developed for water and sewer. So they've been intimately involved in this process, putting a lot of pressure on us and staff to try to drive costs down as much as possible. These 4 slides up here show a couple of pieces of information that folks are going to be interested in. One of the questions that's been asked for a long, long time has been, how can you split this project between water and sewer? We obviously need a wastewater plant that has benefit to the wastewater enterprise, but we also, part of our project includes potable reuse and helping produce water that would offset the city's existing potable water demand. So a portion of that could be attributed to water. So that's how those costs have been split up here. So about 25%, 75% between water and sewer. The second slide down here talks a little bit about how the project's going to be funded. So the rate study is using these different funding sources in order to come up with the future rates. So you'll see a big portion of it here at the bottom is the EPA WIFIA loan that the city's currently pursuing, submitting an application for that on July 9th, actually. It's going to fund about $60 million of the project, roughly. We also have an SRF planning loan the city's already secured. It's about a 1.7% loan, 30-year duration for about $10.3 million, intended to cover a lot of the upfront design costs for the project. We've got a big chunk in here for bond financing. So the city's intent is to pursue low-interest financing through the state revolving fund. But unfortunately, we don't have any kind of letter of commitment there. So in order to finish the rate study, we have to go ahead and assume bond funding for a portion of the project. And then the remaining bars at the top represent the amount of cash that the city would use in order to fund the project. And that cash is coming from existing accumulation in the water and wastewater enterprises. And then these are the big message here today are information on the rates. So up here on the top, we have kind of the individual components of the future proposed $191 a month combined water and sewer rates for the average user. So these guys represent 191, and it shows you the different components that go into that $191 between both the water and the sewer charges. Essentially, the way that the WRF, as we're proposing it today, could be funded would be a $43 a month surcharge on the existing water and sewer bills. That's split between water and sewer. I'm struggling to remember exactly what that number is. Oh, $41 a month, I'm sorry. I believe it's $25 on sewer and $16 on water. And then down here at the bottom just kind of shows, based on your average water usage as a ratepayer here in Morro Bay, what the maximum rate could be. So the number that we always talk about is the average user, and that's based on somebody that uses 500 cubic feet of water a month. So
what kind of household would that be typically?
That's a medium-sized household.
Like 4 people?
3 or 4 people. I can't remember what exactly.
So if you're a single person on low income and you're trying to hold your bills down, you'd be at the lower end of that.
Yeah, it's all dependent on your water usage.
Yeah.
So if you're just a single person household, not a lot of water usage, you're going to skew down towards this 161. And then the 233.5, that's really the higher end. That's somebody that uses 1,000 cubic feet of water per month. So anything over about 8 is considered a high user.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Eric.
Thank you,
and I just want to introduce here, because you're going to be hearing from him later, Alex Handlers. Alex is from the statewide experts on creating rate studies. He's an independent rate consultant. So, Alex, what are you going to be covering later on, just as a preview for our audience, just in a 30-second here?
Sure. Yeah, no, our firm specializes in water, wastewater rates, and finance. So we've been working with the city on evaluating the rate impacts and developing a financing plan for the project. And at the end of this presentation, there's going to be information provided about what the impacts are going to be for a typical single-family home here in Morro Bay.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Eric, are you ready to talk with folks about potable reuse? One of the big questions that people have been raising is the question about potable reuse. And how does that factor in? And is the city getting a good value for doing that? So we're going to have Erika Saris again present about, just give you a preview about this. He'll be going through this in much more detail. So Eric, we just have a couple minutes before we need to start the whole program. So we're just turning on the live camera here. Eric, if you just give us a high-level view about the overall project costs and potable reuse.
Great. Okay, thanks, Don, and I'll make it quick here. So just wanted to talk to these 4 slides here. I think the first and maybe most important thing that people have been paying a lot of attention to is obviously the project cost or the program cost. So these are kind of the 3 phases of the program costs as they've been presented since last year, essentially. $167 million was identified with completion of the facility master plan and master reclamation plan. The City Council reacted to that number, convened a peer review panel of local public works professionals throughout the county. They came together and they identified some cost savings, and the revised project cost at that time was $150 million. Since we've gotten numbers back from proposers on the major component of the project, the work that would happen at the South Bay site, we've also done a deep dive on a lot of the soft costs that are associated with the program in order to get the numbers a little bit tighter. We've removed the demolition work from the existing site to further drive the cost down. And right now the cost for the program is at $126 million total cost. So I just want to highlight that really quickly. Then the other piece is, what is the city getting out of this $126 million program? Not only are they getting a wastewater plant that they need to rebuild in order to meet their new permit that's mandated by the Clean Water Act, but they also, with this project, get a new water supply source for the community. So under this scenario, the city would be pursuing a potable reuse project, an indirect potable reuse project via groundwater injection. In terms of the way that works is you get wastewater from the community, from the local businesses, from residences. That would go through a conventional wastewater treatment process. It would then go through an advanced process that would be located on the South Bay Boulevard site. That water would be treated to a very high level, and then that purified water, it gets injected into the ground by injection wells. After spending several months in the ground, it gets extracted. It'll be extracted by the city's existing Morro well field. And it would go into the king tank and would go into the city's distribution system. So that's just kind of how potable reuse works. But there's been a lot of questions about the feasibility of potable reuse for this community. And so there's these two slides here. There's really two things that we're most concerned with potable reuse. First and foremost is protection of public health. And so the Division of Drinking Water has very strict limitations on the types of treatment processes that need to be used and the levels of pathogen removal that have to be achieved with those treatment processes. And so these 3 treatment processes up here represent what would be built there at the South Bay Boulevard site, and are treatment processes that can be permitted for use with potable reuse, so that we know that we can get the pathogen removal credits that we need with the processes that we're planning for. The next big question has to do with groundwater travel time. So the Division of Drinking Water mandates that we have a certain amount of time in the ground where the wastewater is injected before it can be extracted, and that is a minimum of 2 months. And so an initial study was done last year by GSI that identified injection at different quantities and at different locations throughout the city. And as you can see here, both during the wet and dry periods, we're really considering this first option here, option 1A. During both wet and dry periods, the groundwater travel time exceeds the 2-month minimum that DDW requires. So that's our second hurdle that we need to overcome. There's some additional work that GSI needs to do in order to further the project, but really doesn't really have to do with identifying the feasibility. It's really answering a lot of the detailed questions around the design of the injection wells. Thanks, Don.
Thank you very much, Eric. So we're going to now, this is what the people who are attending today have been learning as they've been going around to the different information stations. Now we're going to turn to the main section of the presentation, and you'll be getting an update about the project and about our agenda and what else that we'll be doing and happening during today's workshop. So I'm going to go back to the front of the room, gather people together, and we'll start right away. Thank you.
I'll talk to you later. Okay.
Going live on the front. Okay. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to today's workshop. I'd like you all to take a seat if you would, as we're going to begin the upfront presentation here and also describe for you how you can engage in today's session. We're seeking your active involvement, and I want to outline all the different ways that we've designed to have your active involvement in this workshop. And it's great to see so many people from the community out here today. Thanks for coming in. And if you would take a seat, it's going to be a little hard for your neighbors to hear if you're standing and talking. So if you wish to have other conversations, I invite you to have them outside of the auditorium so that people can hear in the auditorium effectively. Thank you very much. Thanks for your response. Well, I want to welcome you to the community workshop on Morro Bay's wastewater and water opportunities. I'm Don Maruska, and I'm serving as the facilitator for the session, and I just want to take a moment to give you a little background about me so you can understand what I'm trying to do to help you get information and to have opportunities to express yourself in today's session. I'm a master certified coach and I'm a professional facilitator. I do this kind of work with organizations, communities like this, and organizations around the country and sometimes overseas. I'm pleased that I'm able to do this with you here today because my office for the last 24 years has been right here in Morro Bay, right across from the post office. So I am an office renter, obviously somebody who would be impacted by whatever happens with regard to the water and sewer rates. So I have an interest and a stake in it. The principles and practices and research that I'm using to guide today's session are all based upon the book I wrote, How Great Decisions Get Made. It's published by the American Management Association, used around the world as some best practices for how to engage communities effectively. I do want to highlight that although my office is here, our family lives in Los Osos. Actually, our view is of Morro Bay, so I think about Morro Bay a lot as we look out the window. But what that means is that I'm not a voter here in Morro Bay. I don't contribute to any candidates in Morro Bay. So I'm really trying to be here for you and for the viewing audience that's participating in today's session. And so I'm going to do my best efforts to give you good opportunities to engage and to find ways that you can be active learners and participants in today's session. So let me just take a look at the objectives here. We want you to get factual information so you can learn. We want to make sure you get questions answered, provide opportunities for input and comment. And then one of the key topics that's going to be coming up, in fact, it's going to come up at the City Council's meeting on June 28th, is how to look at the structuring of rates. So we're actually creating an opportunity for you today to make some input directly on that topic. So you can be kind of playing the role of City Council and thinking about how would you noodle through some of the challenging things that are present here. So let me just get a quick read of our audience. How many of you are here because you'd like to learn some more about the project, where it is, what's happening, what's next, and what's going on? Okay, most of you are in that mode, okay? How many of you are here because you have very specific questions you'd like to get answered and things that you want to get sorted out? Okay, just a few of you. And how many of you are here because you'd like to make some comment, personal comment about the current situation, about the opportunities and issues that are at hand? Okay, just a small number. Okay, so I think today's session is going to be very, very useful to you because it's going to be primarily focused on factual information and sharing that factual information with you. There'll also be a time during the break and at the end for you to go back to the information stations that are around and to talk with the staff people and get more information and ideas. We know that there are relatively few people in the community. I think it's only about 5% in any community that I work with that actually wants to stand up and make public comment. Most people, that's like, as they say, public speaking is like the worst thing in their life. So we want to give you many opportunities to write down comments, to do other things, to provide your input in whatever way is comfortable for you. And how many of you are aware that the Blue Ribbon Commission submitted a report on what they're recommending with regard to the rates? Okay, a lot of you, all right. How many of you had a chance to read that and to read the staff report? Oh, quite a few of you. Okay, that's great too. But you also get some overview about that and an opportunity to explore that in some more detail. So here's our agenda. We're pretty well on time. We're going to be going to first an update on the project status, the latest things that are happening, not taking you through all the long history. That's going to be happening with your city manager, Scott Collins, in just a minute. Then we're going to be focusing some time on the three questions that as I've been listening to the community and going to the city council meetings and the other events that you've been having around this topic seem to be the three key questions. And the staff has prepared a very focused kind of information in response to that. And then we're going to break for some public comment about it so that you can have your say on that and then have any brief factual responses that the staff may wish to make in order to round out that discussion. We'll take a break. We're going to come back at 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock is going to really go into what's the most new and notable information here, which is all the information about the rates. What's this going to look like on your bill? What's that mean? How's that going to impact you? And what are the different choices that the City Council is going to need to make in terms of thinking about how it structures those to be of service to the community and getting a project completed and getting something that's workable for the community. We'll be cycling around because we might not have hit all the questions that, I might not have anticipated the key questions that you had in mind. So if you have other questions, we ask you to take the yellow cards and I'll make those available. There's a stack of them over here. I have some up here. You can write down questions as we go along if they're on other topics, and what we have up here is the three key issues there and the rates issues. So if there's something else that needs to get covered, write that out. I'll organize them by topic. We'll try in the remaining time at the end to answer as many of those as we can. And if you have a public comment about something that you haven't already commented about, or you're a fresh commenter that we haven't heard from, there'll be an opportunity for you to comment as well. So I think you can see we're trying to build in here multiple opportunities for you to engage. And then there'll be a time at 4:30 to adjourn, but the staff isn't just going to disappear on you. They'll be around at these information stations and be glad to go into more discussion with you, okay? So that's the game plan. So I want to say that we've created 7 different ways for you to participate, as you can see what I just described. Hope that you'll take advantage of whatever forms are most comfortable and productive for you. And for some of you, it may be just listening to hear what what's presented and what your colleagues and community members bring up. So we'll take a look at that. We are following the city's guidelines for civil discourse. They're right up here to remind speakers when they come up about that. It's a good set of things from my professional practice around the world. Those are good standard practices of what helps communities work. My big hope for Morro Bay is that you'll get through this issue in whatever way you do, whatever decisions you make, and that you'll come out a stronger community. Because strong communities, from my experience, communities that can figure out how to work through issues and do it successfully are the communities that thrive. And whatever decisions they make is how you are strong as a community. So that's the idea. So I want to turn now to your city manager, Scott Collins. I'll just say, how many of you know Scott and his background? Few, but not all of you. Let me just mention a couple things, because I work with cities and counties and special districts throughout the country. And even before Scott arrived here, I was hearing about him, because the president of the City Managers Association for the state of California contacted me and said, wow, you've got a phenomenal person coming to Morro Bay. I hope you can get him. And they're referring to Scott Collins, because Scott has lived and worked in coastal communities, a critical thing. He's figured out, what it takes to get through with the Coastal Commission and the Regional Water Board and other groups. And he has a passion about civic engagement and community participation and figuring out how do you meld community participation with the challenging issues that cities face to get results. So I'm always excited about Scott and what he's doing for this community. And Scott, if you'd take it away with your discussion about where the project stands today and what's up.
Hello. Well, thank you everyone for coming today. And probably one of the best days of the year. Of course, it looks like it's foggy again. That's how it is in Morro Bay. It can change any moment. But really excited that we have a good turnout. This is an extremely important project, an extremely important issue for our community. I've been here for a little over 7 months. And basically every conversation I have with somebody in the community who understands what I do for the city asks, what's going on with that project? How did we get here? Why is it so much? What's it going to do to rates? Those are the kind of questions I hear over and over again. And all great questions and really important ones we have tried to answer and will continue to answer. But really what we need to do is point back to the goals that were created, not only by City Council, but through an evolution on this project. This project, in essence, started in 2003 when we received a letter from the Regional Water Quality Control Board about our waiver that allowed us to continue to operate our system even though it wasn't really meeting full secondary requirements. And that was about 15 years ago, and this thing has taken on a life of its own and has gone through a lot of changes, and those changes have been facilitated through the community. Some of those decisions, points we didn't have say over, some of them we did. But ultimately, this project is a reflection of the values of our community. But here we are standing at the precipice of potentially moving forward with a rate increase, and that's why we felt it was very important that we provide a lot of opportunity for public input. We want to make sure that you understand the impacts, how we got to this point, what are the key assumptions that were built into those rates, so that you can make a very informed decision, a very important informed decision about the future of our community. So with that, I just wanted to go over briefly the project goals. And these were, as I said, built through the community and adopted by City Council. First and foremost is affordability, creating a rate structure that our citizens can afford. We want to do everything we can to minimize the ratepayer and city expense related to this project. The next is to be able to communicate and engage with our community on this issue, because ultimately the decision will be in your hands about funding the project. We also want to make sure that we provide advanced treatment of our wastewater to make sure we're not, returning water into the ocean that's dirty. Next slide, please. We want to also augment the city's water supply. Now, this gets back to the kind of the evolution of this project. When we started in 2003, we weren't thinking about droughts. We weren't thinking about wastewater as an actual benefit to the community. It was just something we let go into the ocean. But as you all know, we experienced a pretty significant drought not that long ago. And we have communities and cities in the world, like Cape Town, South Africa, that is running out of water. They somehow were able to pull it back from the deep end by instituting draconian water restrictions, but they still could be running out of water within 6 months. And this is happening all over the world. So we have an opportunity to use our wastewater effluent to create a potable source of water to help augment what we have. We have a good source with the State Water Project, but it's subject to drought, it's subject to disruption, it's subject to earthquakes and other things that could take us offline. So it's a prudent measure to ensure that we have some kind of backup plan in the instance that we lose state water. We want to make sure that the project has the components that make us competitive for outside funding, because let's face it, America's infrastructure is crumbling. We did a great job. The greatest generation fought and won the war, and they came home and rebuilt America. They built highways, bridges, roads, schools, hospitals in the 1950s and 60s, and here we are trying to replace a wastewater project that was built in the 60s. So we have a lot of work to do, and of course, that comes at a very high cost, and that gets us back to the original goal of trying to find a way to make all these goals that could conceivably be competing with one another to work together. We want to address some of the issues of contaminants of emerging concern, which is just a fancy way of saying that we put stuff into our water system, our wastewater system, like pharmaceuticals that could have damaging effects on our system, so we want to make sure whatever we build takes those into consideration. And last, wastewater projects are not something you want in your backyard, I imagine, so we want to make sure that wherever we site this facility that we limit those impacts on the neighbors. Next slide. So here we are. This just gives you kind of a brief overview of the work that's been done in recent years. As I mentioned, we started this in 2003, but plans shifted after the Coastal Commission decision in 2013, and again after the city and Cayucas went different ways. And so the city looked at 17 alternative sites over the last several years, looking at a host of factors: permittability with Coastal Commission, acquisition challenges, neighborhood impacts, feasibility, and the like, and selected the South Bay Boulevard site. We've done a facility master plan, which really helps planning for the project and understanding the major components and helping us get beyond just preliminary thoughts in our minds into actual things that we can put out for proposals. Then we did a master rec plan, as I said, in response to the drought to make sure that we use the wastewater effluent for a benefit for our community. But of course, when we got our initial project estimate last year, project cost was $167 million. That was the original estimate. And naturally, everybody in the community and city council included took a pause because that number is just too big. But as I've been coming to understand and learn and appreciate working with engineers is that typically the best practice is to, when you start out preliminary, when you have less information, you have to build in contingencies, because the last thing you want to have happen is to say the project's going to cost $100 million and it winds up costing $200 million. Because you know what happens? Not only do you lose your job, but the community loses trust and faith in their government, and that's not a good thing. So ultimately, we're following best practices. We engaged a peer review panel of public work engineers and specialists in the area who helped identify $17 million in savings in the project, which City Council took forward, reducing the overall estimate to about $150 million. And then most recently, we had a design-build team proposal review, and we had great participation from our WharfCAC, or Citizen Advisory Committee on the Wharf Project, to help us in reviewing those proposals to ultimately select a proposer to take us forward with the main components of this project. So that's where we are today with a project that is now around $126 million. Again, following best practices in engineering. The more information you get, the better or more refined your costs are, and it's coming down. Again, we didn't want to go in the other direction because you have things like the Big Dig in Boston where cost overruns almost doubled or tripled their initial estimates. So this is, again, a best practice as far as engineering is concerned and planning. So we are reaching a pretty critical path on this project. Just want to identify a few things that have happened or will happen in the very near future. The Blue Ribbon Commission issued their report to me earlier this week, and we put that out to the public through the City Council special meeting, June 28th agenda packet, as well as the Public Works Advisory Board, the Citizen Finance Advisory Committee, and the WRFCAC special joint meeting on Monday at 3 p.m. here. The same packet has their report, and the report is great because what this committee did was look at all of the assumptions about the wharf project, about our capital needs, about our operations and maintenance, challenged us on every single line item, pushed us, challenged our assumptions, and ultimately got us to a place where we have a rate that, while not cheap by any means, $191 is what the latest figure is after very thorough and detailed analysis, which is a $41 increase over what is anticipated for next year. But you think about all the things that come along with that, and when we started this project and we got the initial estimate last year, we were looking at rates of about $240. So we're now down to $191, and we'll go into that later today about how we got there and what the key assumptions are for that. That's your average water user rate. Okay, so next week, in addition to the advisory committee meeting here at Monday at 3 p.m., we'll also have a special council meeting here as well on Thursday at 6 p.m., next Thursday, to look at the very same things we're talking about today. And it's anticipated that there will be a release of the 218 notice on July 10th. That's anticipated, though that could change. And if that is the case, if it goes forward on July 10th, then we would have the Prop 218 public hearing on August 28th. And we can talk about that if there's questions moving forward. Next slide. And so in developing all of this, as I mentioned, this has been an evolutionary process. It's been not only your city team, but it's been the community. And our city team is full of a lot of expertise, a lot of really talented individuals, and I just want to go talk about them really quickly and then get on to the rest of the presentation. So we have Erika Saris. Eric is our program manager for the Wharf Project. Thank you. He's with Carollo Engineers, and he's a recognized leader in the wastewater and water reclamation field, and he's been a very welcomed addition to this team in helping us lead us on this project. Next, we have Rob Livick. Rob, if you can raise your hand, our Public Works Director. So Rob is a civil engineer of 29 years of engineering experience, and he's been with the city for 12 years and loves this project and has been a key member of that ever since he arrived here. We have Joe Pannone, our city attorney. Joe has been a city attorney for the city for several years, and he has 38 years of experience. Jen Calloway, our lovely finance director. She's been great in bringing increased transparency around our budget and financial operations for the city, and just love the energy she brings to the city. We have Joe Miller, our utility divisions manager. He's our guy on the ground. He understands our system, its flaws, its strengths, and really understands the requirements that we need to bring to bear on our new facility. And last, we have Alex Handlers, our rate consultant, superb rate study consultant. He's worked with the city in the past, and he's really good at using creativity and math at the same time and really helping to problem solve on this very challenging issue. And of course, as a rate consultant, he's just taking direction from us, not telling us what to do. But the Blue Ribbon Commission was very instrumental in, again, challenging city assumptions that helped drive some of the rate study analysis. So there you have the city team in the yellow and the white, but we also have a tremendous community volunteerism. to help this project. On the left side, you have our Wharf Citizen Advisory Committee. And is anybody here from the Wharf CAC? Can they stand up and raise your hand? Okay. Well, there you go. Thank you. Thank you. So this team is full of experts, genuine experts in wastewater, in finance and admin, for wastewater systems, for technical issues. They really have helped us move this project forward in a way that allows us to be permittable and addresses some of the engineering challenges involved with the project. We also have the Public Works Advisory Board. Do we have any members from that committee here today? No. Well, they've been really instrumental in kind of looking at our rates. We have the Citizen Finance Advisory Committee. Come on, Bart. There. Right, but you're gonna take a look at the rates on Monday. Right. Okay. Well, thank you. And then we also have the Planning Commission, which has been looking at the draft environmental impact report and helping us move through the project, making sure that we take care of all of the issues surrounding that from an environmental impact perspective. And last, we had the Blue Ribbon Commission. If we could have the Blue Ribbon Commission members raise their hand. Thank you. They've been really helpful in, again, challenging the assumptions built into our rates and ultimately setting something forward that the community, we believe, is put them in a good position to, understand that it's the best we can do given what the parameters on the project, and ultimately it's something that is reasonable that our community can accept and afford. So with that, I'd like to hand over the presentation to Joe Mueller, our Utilities Division Manager, and he's going to talk about the kind of how we got here with regard to location for the project, as well as some of the permitting challenges related to that. Thank you.
And just so we're certain to have enough time for questions that may come from the audience or public comment that's desired about this, ask each of the presenters to do no more than 5 minutes on your discussion. I'll time it here, and we'll have an equal amount of time available for the public and for public comment or public questions. So there you go.
So real briefly, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the existing treatment plant. So the existing treatment plant is jointly owned between Morro Bay and Cayucas. Initially constructed in 1954, upgraded in 64, and then the last time it was upgraded was in the early 80s. So during the upgrade in the 80s, it was purposely upgraded to meet 301H waiver standards for secondary treatment, meaning full secondary treatment are those lower numbers, the ones that we're currently under, the 30 milligrams per liter BOD and 30 milligrams per liter TSS. What BOD is essentially the food component of the wastewater in your effluent stream that's going out to the ocean. TSS is the amount of solids that are in that waste stream going out to the ocean. So the existing treatment plant, again, was designed around a BOD, a food component going out to the ocean in the effluent of 120 milligrams per liter, solids of 70 milligrams per liter. The conscious decision to design that plant around those parameters was based on the 301H waiver that allowed that. So this March, the city received a new wastewater discharge permit without that 301H waiver, meaning we have to meet these 30-30 requirements. So currently, the facility cannot meet those because it was never designed to meet those. And the other component of that, skip this one real quick, is the flow. So part of that design of that treatment facility, the upgrade in the 80s, was it was designed for only 1 million gallons hydraulically going into that secondary treatment process. So anything over that 1 million gallons a day bypasses the secondary treatment process, meaning that flow essentially receives primary treatment. What that is it goes into a tank, what's heavy settles to the bottom, what light floats to the top, and then it's blended with your effluent that's actually been broke down for the food component. So we chlorinate it, disinfect it, and send it out to the ocean at that point. So what this graph represents here is everything above that red line does not receive any secondary treatment. Secondary treatment is required by our new permit for every drop of wastewater that comes into the treatment plant. So what we see is the blue lines are actually wet weather. So the wet weather flows definitely through I&I. We get a lot of spikes that are above basically that 1 MGD. But it also shows those green is 2 periods that we measured during a holiday event and high tourism times that we get flows over 1 MGD even during the dry season without any of the influence of rainwater I&I. All these flows that are represented here are without Cayucas. So we did the calculation, removed Cayucas' flows. I want to go back real quick. This is just an excerpt of our time schedule order, because what I said is, we definitely got a treatment plant permit in March that requires 30/30. We do not meet that standard. So what are we in violation today? What we have is the regional board is giving us time. They understand we're working through this process to build a new treatment facility, and solve our issues and come into permit compliance. So they're allowing us time with a time schedule order to meet that requirement. A few other areas that I wanted to cover is, a lot of people come up and say, why can't we just keep the plant on the beach? Well, the bottom line is Coastal Commission denied the project on the beach. Denied it back in 2013, unanimous decision, 13-0. So due to coastal hazards and the influence. So then again in September, when we did a pause, looked at different sites, came back and said, is this still not our best location? Because by far, it is the cheapest location. Coastal came again, encouraging us to, because of coastal hazards, remove it off of the beach location and stay the course and look at sites further inland. I'm going to turn it over to Eric. Thank you.
And you were right on time. Thank you for being so concise.
Thanks, Joe. So again, my name is Erika Saris. I'm with Corolla Engineers, the city's new program manager. I've been involved here for a couple of months. I've had the opportunity to meet a number of you in the public. Looking forward to meeting some additional folks today. And again, want to say thank you to the folks at WRFCAC and Blue Ribbon Commission who we've been working with on really some of the most challenging pieces of the program to date, which is bringing on board a design builder or getting through that procurement process on the design build and then through the rate process with the Blue Ribbon Commission. So thank you guys for your help with that. Just wanted to talk a little bit about the value of the project. As Scott mentioned previously, cost is obviously something that's been a big focus. And so this is kind of the evolution of the program's cost to date. Based on kind of going back to last year when the $167 million figure was put out there as a result of the completion of the facility master plan and the master reclamation plan. Again, the city council said, hey, we need to stop, take a look at ways that we can reduce the cost, convene the peer review committee, which is how we get to the $150 million project. And so that's from about last summer, fall of last year. Now we're talking about 126. If folks were at the council meeting on the 13th, they may have heard a number that was 128.5 million. Why have we reduced costs from 150 to 126? I want to be clear, and Scott alluded to this before, the way that these programs evolve is we start with very little definition on what the project is going to look like, and as we get proposals from different entities, for example, the design builder, we have a cost for that main portion of the project. We're able to reduce contingencies, and we're able to get a better handle on what the project cost is going to be. So we went through an exercise over the last month of trying to look at each individual cost item and see how we could reduce that based on, one, were we carrying an assumption that now, for example, the design of the conveyance facility, well, we have a contract with the design engineer to design the conveyance facilities, so let's make sure that we're carrying that cost, rather than just a percentage that we apply to what we think the construction cost is going to be. So that's how we get to the 126 million that's up there now. It's broken down into 5 different components: the on-site facilities that you'll see there in green, the conveyance facilities, the off-site recycle water facilities, soft costs, which soft costs are things like construction management, permitting, and other things that aren't kind of hard construction. And then we have some reserves in there, some money that we've set aside for kind of the unknowns that we're going to face once we get through this next year of design, and then also when we get into construction. So that's kind of how the costs break down. So everything we're going to talk about here today in terms of rates and everything else is based on that $126 million figure. So a lot of people have been asking lately about potable reuse. It's an important part of the project, something I'm excited about, and it's one of the most challenging things that we do in our industry, and it's a great opportunity here for the city of Morro Bay to augment their water supply. So just a quick overview of what that entails, essentially, is that you have wastewater that's coming from the community, from the residences, from commercial, from local businesses. That wastewater goes through a fairly conventional wastewater treatment process, but then after that it goes through a number of different steps, cutting edge technology, again, the highest level of technology that we have in the industry in order to meet some very strict requirements for pathogen removal. It goes through those recycled water purification facilities, and then that purified water is pumped into the ground using wells. And then after a certain period of time, that water is extracted by, in this case, the city's existing Morro well field, and is going to be sent up to the King's tank and brought into the city's distribution system. So just an overview of how potable reuse works in the context of this project and the community of Morro Bay. There's been a number of questions about the feasibility of potable reuse, and is it feasible? So I'm going to cover two different components of potable reuse. Two of the things that we're very concerned about when we take on these types of projects. One is the protection of public health. Division of Drinking Water, that is their sole mission, is the protection of public health, and they're the entity that regulates potable reuse type activities. So they want to make sure that you are building a process that meets very, very high levels of pathogen removal. And so there's a equation that they put out there, these numbers that you need to meet in terms of pathogen removal. And these three things up here, the membrane bioreactor, reverse osmosis, and the UV advanced oxidation, they represent three processes that Division of Drinking Water recognizes as being able to meet these strict requirements. And those are the three processes that were included in the RFP that the design build proposals were based on. So this is the project that the city's project is based on, these three key technologies here, and can be permitted for this type of potable reuse. The other question has been about groundwater and groundwater travel time. GSI Water did some initial work last year and took a look at specifically what would be the travel time between various injection locations and where it would be extracted at the Morro well field. So as you can see from this table, there's a couple different scenarios that we looked at. If you look at scenario 1A, which is essentially injecting about a little over 800 acre feet of water into the ground, and then later extracting about 1,000 acre feet of that water. Both during the wet and the dry period, the travel time in the groundwater was shown to exceed the 2-month minimum that Division of Drinking Water requires. So what I'm trying to say here is that potable reuse is feasible. It's something that can be done here in Morro Bay. The additional hydrogeo work that's going to be coming up is really to look at a couple of different things. One, it's to optimize the amount of water that gets put into the ground and gets extracted without creating any issues with water quality. And then the other thing would be identifying the best location in the city to inject that water. There's a couple of different options at this point in time. So what does eliminating recycled water from the program get you? Well, at the very top line, it's essentially reducing the project cost by about $20 million. It'd be about a $105 million project without reclamation. Would it meet the city's goals? Without a recycled water component, it would not meet the city's goals of producing recycled water and specifically producing that water to augment the city's water supply. Would you get any potable water offset with an ocean discharge only type facility? The answer to that is no, and the project that we're looking at would offset about 80% of the city's current water usage, about 800 acre feet per year. Low interest financing. As Scott mentioned, infrastructure is deteriorating all over the country. It's very difficult to get low interest loan and grant money. This project, because of the cutting edge nature of it, is made the city available. The WIFIA loan has become available to the city because of this project, and also makes it very attractive to the state in terms of their Clean Water State Revolving Fund. So it really puts the city in a really good position to be able to get that low interest financing. A secondary only project or a project just going to the ocean, it would be very difficult to secure that low interest financing. So what are the rate impacts? So when you take into account all this low interest financing, you can see there's quite a big difference between the project cost, the program cost of 105 and 126 million. But when you look at it on a monthly basis, and these are based on the recent rate study that we just completed, the city, each ratepayer would be paying about $1.50 extra a month to be able to get this recycled water project and be able to get this potable water benefit. The picture even looks better if the city is able to get the Clean Water SRF funds. We're banking on the WIFIA because we've got an application and we've got that commitment there. We don't have a commitment. We will be pursuing state revolving fund loans, but we don't have the commitment yet. It's just based on the timing of how these things work. If we were to get that loan, which again, we think we have a very good chance of getting that loan, the potable reuse project actually becomes cheaper. I have it down here as 0, but actually it would be a bit of a savings to do this additional capital and get that additional water supply benefit. So again, the city is actively pursuing low-interest financing options and grants. I'm going to highlight just a couple. In the rate study that you'll see, the bonds are about a 4.7% interest rate, and we're looking to not finance this project with bonds. While we had to base the rate study on a portion of it being funded by bonds, again, it's a little bit of a nuance that Alex or myself or anybody else on the project team could describe when we break out here after the presentation. We had to assume some bond in the rates. We're looking at going after, again, WIFIA and SRF. And so you can see up here some of the benefits of these different funding mechanisms. Not only are they low interest rates, we've got a low interest rate planning loan of about $10 million at a 1.7% interest rate. SRF is right around 2.2 is what we're estimating. And then you can see the WIFIA is about 3.25. Again, this is all compared to the 4.7%, which when you're talking about 30 and 35-year financing on large dollar amounts, it's a significant cost savings by getting these low interest loans. Where are we in the process? We've secured the planning loan for $10.3 million. For Clean Water SRF, there's a preliminary application in, but we cannot submit the final application until we have a certified EIR, and we've got the rate process has been completed. So as soon as those two things were done, we'd be submitting a final application there to the SRF folks. And then in terms of the WIFIA, the application for that is due on July 18th, and we're proposing to submit that on July 9th is where our schedule is actualizing right now. Just wanted to highlight really quickly in terms of affordability, something that you guys have heard a lot about the last couple meetings, which is the utility discount program. Again, on the 13th, City Council moved to make some changes to the utility discount program. But again, that process is open enrollment starts on the 1st and is going to carry out through the rest of the month, and we can answer questions about that at the breakout sessions if anyone has any additional questions on that program. Rob?
Okay, went a little over the time, but there's a lot of questions in there that I think got answered through that, so let that go along. When you hear the duck, that means the 5 minutes is up. But Rob's going to be picking up here with a discussion that has come about from the community, again, something I've been hearing, which is, well, what's being done to take care of what we've got? Where's the money being spent? What are the plans for moving this forward? So Rob's going to be answering that for you.
Thank you, Don. Morro Bay, we have about 60 miles of underground pipes that collect our wastewater throughout the community. That's conveyed either directly to the wastewater treatment plant or goes to one of 3 pump stations that then is pumped to the wastewater treatment plant. Much of this infrastructure developed over time in the city, starting in the 50s and continuing to present day. So there's some old pipe in the ground. In the north area of town where this is showing, the soil type is generally fairly clayey, and it's subject to shrink swell. So as water gets into it, the ground expands, gets a little bigger, moves the pipes around a little bit, then it dries out. The pipes move again, causes cracks in the piping system. Those cracks allow water to enter the system that contributes to our higher flows during the wet weather time. Morro Bay is not unique in having these issues with underground pipes. Communities all across, I don't know one community, maybe with the exception of Los Osos because their system is brand new, but they'll face it eventually where their pipes crack and allows water to get in. Other communities I've worked for, we have a constant program for renewing pipes and doing maintenance on our system. We do maintenance on our collection system every day, single day. We have a collections crew that is out there cleaning our lines, making sure the wastewater is free flowing. They do about 6 point repairs in the system a year. We coat manholes, epoxy coat the inside of them to prevent water from leaking in. We replace the grade rings on the top to keep water from coming in, replace the lids, put liners in them so that water just doesn't free flow into the system. We're highlighting the very north area of town. That's probably our worst area for I&I. We did some recent smoke testing. And some of you, maybe nobody in this room would have this happen, but we had some roof drains that were directly connected to the system, and those folks got letters to please disconnect their roof drains from our sanitary sewer systems. We don't want rainwater into the sanitary sewer as much as we can avoid. So these are the areas that we've identified for need of critical repair. And here is our capital projects list that Crollo engineers assisted us in preparing for the most critical items over the next 5 years. It's about $1 million a year worth of construction. And you can see about 2/3 of the way down the list in 2019, $249,000 for capital replacement upstream of Lift Station 1. Those are those pipes that are in the worst shape in the north area of town. Also, the gravity sewer main along Atascadero Road, that needs some significant repairs. And then throughout the years, we'll be continuing to do that. This is based on the most recent capital improvement plan. We prepared a plan back in 2006 that identified capacity issues, but really didn't do a good job identifying deficiencies in the system. We've been in a process of televising our system, doing smoke testing to identify those critical areas. I don't want to get the duck here, so I'm going to try to speed up. Our water infrastructure, also about the same vintage, and about 60 miles of pipe, no surprise there, throughout town. We have several water storage tanks. The highlighted areas shows projects that we'll be working on over the next 5 years. This table shows those projects. In the first year, 2019, we'll be looking at a project that'll replace the fill line going up to Blanca, the tanks at the very north end of town. We have 4 water storage tanks there. A pipeline to Sequoia Street for capacity issues. And ultimately, probably one of the bigger projects on here is replacing the Nutmeg storage tank. It's a 100,000-gallon tank up there at the top of the Nutmeg. It needs to be 1 million gallons of storage to mitigate the need for fire flows. So much of these water system improvements are related to maintenance, but they're also related to capacity issues in maintaining that required fire flow to provide fire protection for the community. Here's a couple of shots of some of our water infrastructure. That's the Nutmeg tank up at the top of the hill. It's 100,000 gallons and also is about 35 years old, needs to be replaced. We have a booster pump station at Vashon Street on the west side of the highway. That Blanca tank fill line will replace the need for that pump station. That pump station is tiny. We can barely get in there to work on pumps in there, and it's in somebody's side yard right next to their house, so it's not the most convenient to work on. That concludes my portion. I'm going to turn it back over to Don.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rob. And now, let me just check in. How many people have questions about the information that you've received thus far? Just raise your hand so I get a sense of how many. Okay, there's one, I see. How many of you have public comment that you'd like to make? 1, 2, okay. So why don't we do this? There's another one back here. Okay, so we've got a couple of them. I think we've got plenty of time to cover that. Why don't we provide 3 minutes per person? I'll just keep track of it. When you hear the duck, that's the time's up. But we're trying to do this a little bit more informally as a workshop so that you feel comfortable. But if you would come up and use the podium just so people can hear you, come up. Let's take a question first, and then we'll go to the couple of public comments. So if you just come up, pose your question, and there's a couple other comment. Oh, there's a bunch of other question cards here.
Hi, Karen Crowley. I just wanted to know how much time was given for the new regulations to get done.
So let's do this. What we'll do is we'll take all the questions, and we'll take and staff keep track of the questions as they come in, and public comment, and then we'll see if the staff has factual information to share with you about those. Okay. And any other questions that came up? Yes, sir. Come on up and ask your question at the microphone up here. Sure. If you just state your name and residence.
Bob Mastro, North Morro Bay. I have a question on the groundwater recharge, whether or not in some areas, especially in our area, there's places where water actually comes up out of the ground. Is that going to affect any of those areas? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I guess we're now to people who wanted to come up and ask questions publicly. And Joe is over here. If a lot of that information went by quickly and you want to take a look at it, he's got printouts of it that's available. We haven't finished the presentation. There are more presentation to come after the break. But who wanted to come up and make a public comment? Yes, come on up, sir. Thank you. You just state your name and residence and make your comment, please. That'd be great.
Okay. My name is Bill Martini, Morro Bay. And I've been kind of involved or, kind of been following this since probably 2004, 2005, way in the very beginning. And at that time, it was going to cost $34 million for Cayucas/Morro Bay to build the plant on site. It was my recollection there were other companies that said they could build that plant any place in Morro Bay for approximately $25 million, recycled water. PERC was one of them. And of course, my main concern now is the actual costs from that point to where we're talking about $125 million. I think the current site is not a bad site. I think there was a better site. Originally, I had suggested Tri-W inside the city limits, so it was hidden from the neighborhoods. It's in the city limits, so you weren't in the coastal, and it would gravity feed both valleys. That's behind the roundabout on the east side of town. That said, we are where we are now. I wanted to first off mention that pumping costs has always been an issue where the site is now. And in all fairness to the city, the actual pumping costs, from what I understand, additional costs is $48 million or $48,000 a year in electricity. So that's a non-issue. So pumping costs are not an issue as far as any site when you have a plant that I think it costs somewhere around $1 million a year to run it, maybe $1 million too, in labor and all that. But my problem is, as far as if the plant is going to cost $70 million, how the offsites are going to cost another $55 million, when originally the cost of a force main was about $1 million a mile, or say it's $3 million to go from where we're at now to the new site. You can currently go up to the top of Radcliffe, that's maybe a half a mile away, and you can actually gravity feed into the new site over farm ground. So, it shouldn't cost you more than a couple million for your pipeline. And what I'm getting at right now is I think the site isn't the best. It's down in a hole, but I think it will work for the city. It's definitely not visually going to affect everyone or anyone. But I just can't imagine the cost going from $25 million up to $70 million for the plant and then another $55 million. And I think that's the main issue, is how did the price get so off the wall? So if there's any way of actually dropping the cost down, Cayucas, I talked to the sanitary district the other day, their pipeline and their cost for a plant, they have a guaranteed price, and they say it may even come lower for a plant that will do a max of 1.3 million gallons a day. It's 27 million. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Yeah, we were open for public comment there. Okay, staff, would you like to respond to the questions that you heard where you've got factual information to respond? And please use the microphone. It's right over here. Let me pass it to you. And then I have a number of other questions that have been asked, and I will go to the ones that are relevant for now. Some of the questions are actually relevant for what we're going to come to after the break, so we'll hold
we
those.
needed clarification on that first question about the regulations. Sorry, I'll bring the mic to you.
Well, you had said that the city was given a new, I don't have the terminology. Okay.
All right, that was helpful. Thanks.
So we were issued a permit back in December that required full secondary compliance. Also, the regional board recognized that we couldn't do that instantly, so we have a time schedule order issued that allows us up to 5 years to complete the project. Just digging a little deeper, with the former project, we had a settlement agreement with the regional board that required a plant to be fully secondary in 2014. Otherwise, it was subject to penalties. Should we not meet the requirements of the new time schedule order, they have the ability to go back to that original court action or board action that for that original consent decree and assess those penalties should they choose to do that, according to Mr. Packard from the Regional Water Quality Control Board.
I believe the next question had to do with potable reuse and water daylighting. And I would say that that's mainly one of the big reasons why we need to do some of the additional hydrogeological work. The area that we're looking at in the Morro Valley is probably not the area that you might be referring to, and so I think we have a high degree of concern that that's going to be the case, but the additional hydrogeo work will let us figure that out and exactly how much water we can put into the ground. Before we don't want to just treat this as much water as possible to a very high level. It's obviously costly from both the capital perspective as well as ongoing O&M. So we don't want to treat too much water and put it into the ground. We just want to treat enough that's going to give us the maximum benefit, and we don't want to treat water that's going to go out to the ocean to a high level. I think was it the cost of the Cayucas facility? Okay. So I think the next question about the cost of the Cayucas facility, it's actually a good question, and it's interesting to note. So they have a $27 million project for actually a membrane bioreactor, which is very similar to kind of the heart of Morro Bay's project. So essentially the same technology. Now, the gentleman stated that they have a capacity of 1.3 MGD. That's a maximum capacity. So that 1.3 is equivalent to our 7 or 8 MGD capacity that we would be building Morro Bay's treatment plant for, because we're talking about highest peak hour flow with the influence of groundwater, or excuse me, with the influence of stormwater. So if we take Cayucas, really Cayucas' plant is being sized for about 300,000 gallons per day on an average basis. Morro Bay's is being sized for 1 million gallons a day on an average basis. So somewhere between 3 and 4 times the size. If you take that $27 million figure, you escalate that up based on the size of the Morro Bay facility. You take into consideration the distance from their pump station to their facility on Toro Creek versus where we're going out to the South Bay Boulevard site, Plus, they're not treating water to a potable reuse standard. They're just taking it to a purple, and what we would consider purple pipe level. The costs of the projects are not very far off when you take and look at them in an apples-to-apples comparison. And so Cayucas actually provides a pretty good example of where you might think the cost would be for Morro Bay when you consider how small it is or the size of it, and then all the other components that the city's project includes.
Is that it on your responses? Okay, we've got some more questions that have come up here. Let me just cover them. A question about the peer review pause and the comment from the peer review about building or upgrading the plant at or near the existing plant, and the decision about not to go a different route than that peer review recommendation.
Yes, our peer review panel, that was probably the easiest of the cost savings measures, was to recommend that we relook at the existing site. And we did do that. We looked at, brought that to council to have us look at properties around that. That generated an immediate response from California Coastal Commission staff that were, quite frankly, surprised that we would even be looking at that site again. The deputy director's comment to me was, he asked me if I remembered how long it took to get a decision, a staff recommendation from them before for denial, and whether I thought I would expect anything different in this case. We brought that information to council, and council directed us to look at the South Bay Boulevard site, and selected that as their preferred location for this project.
So the decision of the Coastal Commission was made in 2013, and things have changed slightly since then, though the Coastal Commission is, is governed by the Coastal Act, which is a very broad definition of development, and putting up a street sign could qualify as development according to the Coastal Act. And I experienced that in the city of Santa Cruz, and trying to change some parking regulations and putting up signs triggered a coastal development permit. I'm not kidding. So, but since 2013, sea level rise information, science, determining kind of the quickening pace of sea level rise, that science has improved drastically, and the new modeling information is presenting worse information in terms of how quickly it's accelerating. Now, wherever you are on the political spectrum, science is showing that this is happening. And so the Coastal Commission, after 2013, adopted sea level rise policy guidance document that specifically looks at wastewater treatment facility plants and says, cite them outside of coastal hazards. So that is a new thing, and they don't typically issue guidance, policy guidance. They kind of just go off of feeling in a lot of cases, and just the individual instance. They don't have a lot of guidance around some of their decision making. But the fact that they have one on this issue should be reason enough for us to take a serious pause into thinking about whether you want to go back and fight that fight. And further, the SeaWorld was an example of a very major corporation that thought it might be a good idea to challenge the Coastal Commission regarding the expansion of one of their marina entertainment facilities just on the San Diego Bay, Mission Bay. And it got so tangled up within the coastal development permit process that they actually got to the point where they decided it was in their best interest to end the orca program, the breeding program, in the orca show in the face of a challenge from the Coastal Commission. So that just gives you a sense of how far the Coastal Commission is willing to go with regard to the Coastal Act. So those things alone, kind of, as a city manager, city council, engineers, folks are looking at from a reasonability. What should we expect? The probability of success, I would say, very low in trying to go back and fight that fight again.
Okay. We've got a number of other questions that have come up. Some of these questions may have been written before the staff provided their presentation to you. So what I'm going to do is just acknowledge the questions and note that the staff responded, and that if you have more questions that you want to follow up, please catch them at the break at one of the information stations. Or if you feel like that hasn't been adequately addressed, there'll be an opportunity for public comment at the end. We want to be sure that you're comfortable that nothing's being glossed over or set aside. But there are some questions about, why can't you just do enough to satisfy the EPA requirements? I think those were addressed by Joe in the initial discussion about the status of the existing plant, what has to change, and what would need to be required to do it, and the comments that Eric offered with regard to is there an incremental cost to the ratepayer of taking on the potable reuse? So we're going to set those aside for just a moment. There's a question here as well about, the project cost seems to be changing. I think Eric was describing and Scott was, your city manager, was describing the process by which you go from broad estimates to more refined estimates, and that is a professional process of driving down the rates. If you have more questions about that, please ask Eric during the break to go into that in some more detail. There's some questions, though, that weren't addressed here. What's the situation with Cayucas about the existing property? Do they want to be bought out? Is there some value in their portion of the property? How's everything going to get worked out as you separate from each other? Oh.
So those discussions. The battery. Hello. Okay. There. Sorry about that. The city is engaging with Cayucas staff regarding the decommissioning of the plant as we speak. So that'll take quite a bit of time. I think they have a 40% ownership of the property. So their position is that they're interested in understanding what their financial benefit or burden may be with regard to both decommissioning and future use of that site. The $126 million does not include that. That decision was made when we looked at the rate study based upon the timeline of getting to a point where we'd actually be in the position of decommissioning, the fact that we can probably get a lot of local bids on that, and the fact that we still have a lot of work to do with Cayucas on kind of negotiations, and quite frankly, a lot of community work to do about determining the best use of that property moving forward. There's been a lot of ideas thrown out, and so that process would take a significant time, probably outside of a 5-year window that we're looking at with rates.
Okay, there's a question here. Maybe the city attorney as well as the city manager would like to respond to this. Why did the city mislead and omit on the WIFIA letter of interest?
What's that?
That's all there is.
What was the question, sorry?
Isn't that considered a fraudulent act on a federal loan? So is there a misleading or statements or omissions on the WIFIA letter of interest?
I reviewed the letter of interest to the WIFIA that was submitted back in 2016, and looked at kind of an analysis of kind of the city's analysis and narrative that was put into that response, and I didn't see anything that was irregular, nor did I see anything that was inconsistent with what the city had been saying at the time with regard to the project, the benefits, the necessity. Those things seem to be pretty consistent with what the city had been saying. So I didn't see issue with that.
Okay. There's another question here, again, goes to the feasibility of the injection wells. I think, Eric, you spoke to that. This question might have been written prior to Eric's presentation about it. If you do have a question, check him during the break at station number 2 down there, and I'm sure he'll be glad to go through that in more detail. There's a question about the EIR and about hydrogen sulfide gas on North Main Street and how that's being considered. Is it a Class 1 CEQA impact? What's happening on that? I know you have a draft EIR out. You're responding to the questions. Who has some information about hydrogen sulfide up on North Main Street, and what the impacts might be.
I don't recall if that was a formal question that was received on the draft EIR. It's not coming to mind right this instant, but I think there was a similar question asked at a WRFCAC meeting a couple weeks ago, having to do with the generation of hydrogen sulfide gas in the force main between the proposed conveyance or lift station to the new site. And so we did talk about that a little bit in terms of there is in the project at the South Bay Boulevard site odor control that would be put there so that those fugitive emissions coming in with the wastewater would be captured and sent through odor control to remove the hydrogen sulfide. But I think that's the nature of the question, and whoever asked that question, if that's not correct or needs some more clarification, come find me here in a little bit.
Okay.
Specific to North Main, many of the odor concerns are on the Cayucas line that brings their gravity down through town and into the wastewater treatment plant. And these odors are generated because of the age of sewage in the pipeline. That line won't be conveying raw sewage anymore. That will go to the Cayucas plant. So we won't have old Cayucas sewage flowing through Morro Bay.
Okay. There's a couple of final questions here on this section. They really relate to, why haven't you fixed the sewer lines and other things already with the money from the 2015 vote? And I think Rob spoke to that. If you have more questions about that during the break, catch Rob at the station number 3 there to respond to that. I think those might have been written before Rob spoke. And then the other questions that we have are really related to the Prop 218 process. What are the rates? How are they figured out? We're going to take a brief break and come back and have a deep dive into that so that you can know exactly how that's come about. Since that report just got filed, at least the staff report, yesterday, this is fresh information. Want to be sure that you're all informed about that. And that's going to be, I suggest we take a 10-minute break, come back at 3:15. Jen Calloway, the finance director, baked wonderful cookies for you at her own expense that are available out in the lobby. There's water as well. Be sure to come back at 3:15. We look forward to having all of you here and getting your input on future rates. A couple things for you to know is that if the slides went by quickly for you, we can appreciate that. The staff is going to put this up, the slides right after today, up on the website so everyone has access to it. And there's also hard copies of the slides. So if you need those, if you just raise your hand, a staff member will come around and get you a copy. So that you have that at hand, and any questions or things that you might want in that regard. There was a question that came up right at the end. Actually, an audience member came up and asked that there actually be a more explicit response to the question about how the 2015 Prop 218 approved rates been used for repair and maintenance, et cetera, of the existing system. So Rob is going to clarify that somewhat further for you. So Rob Livick, who is the Public Works Director.
We had amounts identified in our existing 2015 rates that had dollar amounts each year for collection system repairs and water system improvements in our rate study. That's correct. With the exception of the Main Street Atascadero line, those projects weren't specifically identified. The major project in the collection system was that Main Street Atascadero Road line. That the nature of the repair was predicated on what we know today. We know that line is a jointly owned line. Cayucas and Morro Bay are in that line together, flowing towards the wastewater treatment plant. If Cayucas was remained in it, it was a different project than city alone. Also, it was dependent on where the plant was located, what we were going to do with the Atascadero Road Main Street line. We now know those questions. We now know how to proceed forward with that line. We've identified those current costs. We've also identified costs for engineering in there, which were not identified in previous studies. So we can proceed with that. I think we have it, the first phase of it, identified in 2019 to start that work on it. Also, it's not like we don't do any repairs. Like I said, our collection crew does work every day on our collection system, cleaning sewer lines, keeping roots out of the sewer lines, keeping oil and grease out of there. They also video inspect, smoke test to make sure that there are no illicit connections to that line. The other thing that we do is through the development process, when you remodel your home and either increase the fixture units or have a significant remodel, we require you to televise that line, and most of the time it also requires you to replace either a portion of your lateral or that connection at the main, because in this city, the property owner owns the sewer lateral from their house all the way out to the main, including that connection at the main. And most of those connections that were put in the 50s, 60s, and 70s are not really the way you would connect today. They broke a hole in the top of the pipe, shoved a pipe into it, maybe grouted around it, maybe packed paper around it, and then backfilled it. Those are spots of inflow and infiltration into the system. On the water system, and we rebuilt 3 lift stations, or replaced 2 of those lift stations, rebuilt the lift station number 1. On the water system side, new PRV at the south end of town, recoating of the Black Hill tank, new cathodic protection in it, uncountable valve replacements that we've done all over town. These valves, like I said, some of them date from the 50s. Some of them are impossible to operate. So we've had to replace those valves. We've also inserted valves where valves need to be so that when there is a main break, we can shut down the system. And then, quite frankly, it's been a resource allocation issue. Morro Bay is a small city with a small engineering and maintenance team. We don't have all the resources to do everything at once. And so I think as we move forward, now that we've better identified these projects and the most critical ones, we can move forward with these projects. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're next going to move to the discussion about rates, and you're going to be hearing how those were calculated, and you're going to be hearing presentations from Alex Handlers, Erika Saris, and I think Jen Calloway, your finance director here. So I'll turn that over to the next piece of the discussion so that people understand how were these rates developed, how do they come about, and what is being done to make sure that they're as affordable as possible. Just that to go forward.
Okay. So Alex and I are going to tag team this a little bit. So he did all of the cash flow projections and the rate calculations based on the information that staff gave him, Eric gave him, and feedback from the Blue Ribbon Committee. And what has gone into that rate study is what we're illustrating on this slide. The wharf project of $123 million And it's a little bit of a nuance, but we want to point out that it's 123 is what you're funding through the study. The project itself is 126, so as we have some cash on hand that we're keeping set aside in case for that project reserve, in case there's some things that come up that we need to fund. So your rate includes 123 million towards the project, 6.8 million towards water capital improvements, 5.1 towards sewer capital improvements, and O&M. O&M is the operations and maintenance of the facility, the personnel cost, supplies and materials. There's been some feedback, and we've heard that feedback about the water sewer split of this project and how much the water will fund of the project versus the sewer funds. So the decision has been made that we will draw the line between the tertiary, after the tertiary treatment, everything after that's going to be funded out of the water rates in the water fund, and that's about 29%, about 30% of the project. The remaining part's going to be funded through the sewer rates and out of the sewer fund. And the point to that is everything up to and after that tertiary treatment is sewer related, and we've really hit that reclamation point after that. So we've already made, during the third quarter budget update, we reimbursed the sewer funds for some water components to the project of about $250,000. And then going forward, we'll fund the program through the split between the two enterprise funds. So again, the total project cost is $126 million. This is illustrating kind of the phase-in of when we expect to spend that money through the next several years as the project moves forward. And this shows the funding sources for that. So we have the WIFIA loan at about $60 million. The SRF planning loan, that's $10 million. That we've already been awarded. We haven't started to draw down on that yet, but we expect to in 18-19 if the project moves forward as we hope and plan it will. We have bond funding after that for about 20 million, and then the rest of that is going to be either cash on hand or cash that we accumulate as you start to pay your rates and we're not expensing it out. So that gives us some ability to pay-go, we call that pay-go, and finance less of the project, so it saves us on some interest rates. I'm going to let Alex talk a little bit about the rates themselves.
Oh, thanks, and I just want to make one comment about the debt service. Obviously, that's a key funding component of what needs to be paid for this treatment plant. So that's why the city's aggressively going after any kind of subsidized loan financing. Anything they can do to get the debt service lower means that the rates could be lower at the end of the day. And there are some alternatives with whether you start this charge in another year down the line or whether you phase it in, the additional charges you need to fund the facilities. The sooner you start charging them, the more cash you're going to be generating for the project in the near term that can be used to help pay for the project and reduce ultimately the amount of debt financing you take on. So more funding in the near term results in less rates over the longer term. So there's just kind of a balance there folks will have to, the city council will have to weigh in on. So what we did, I'm Alex Handlers, I'm with the firm Bartle Wells Associates. We've worked with the city before. I recognize some faces out here from the prior rate study we did. We specialize in water and wastewater rates, financial planning, and financing, which all come to bear on this project. So we've been working with the city, last year kind of taking a preliminary look at what the rate impacts are. Again, this year working with city staff, the engineering consultants. We've had meetings and conference calls with the Blue Ribbon Committee, Blue Ribbon Commission. I'm not sure what it's called. But they have done, I'll tell you, a tremendous job of really getting into details of the numbers and the assumptions in here and asking questions. I'm just surprised they've been asking me about on a whole host of issues and the rest of the staff. So you've got some watchdogs out there that want to keep the rate as low as possible. Obviously, everybody does, including the city as well. So we developed financial projections, incorporating the cost of the project, building in some reasonable financing assumptions, and kind of project long-term where the rates need to go to fund this facility. And what we're calculating is that You've already adopted 5 years of rate increases back in 2015. Those rate increases are continuing to phase in, and they go through next fiscal year and one more rate increase the year after. I think there's 7-8% rate increases. I don't remember the details off the top of my head. But obviously, those charges were predicated on what was originally a $75 million total project cost, of which the city was only going to fund 75% of. So, they were aimed towards funding a $56 million facility from the city's perspective, and they assumed state revolving fund loan financing, which is very low rate financing, which used to be more widely available. But that program, there's many agencies are now trying to take care of that program because they're going through the same situation that this community is going through. There's a lot of old treatment plants out there and old pipelines. So work with other agencies that have to spend, hundreds of millions of dollars to rebuild their treatment plant and pipelines. So it's kind of a once-in-a-generational thing that this community is going through as well right now. And yes, it does cost a lot, but the goal is to try to make it as least painful as possible. So we developed these projections, and yes.
So, Alex, what you're saying then is about that 2015 rate increase, once Cayuga is back out of the project, and that, we're basically raising enough money to build, we couldn't build the plant with $56 million.
No, you couldn't. And that was based on preliminary cost estimates as well, before people really got into figuring out what the project's going to be. And also a different construction climate, back what they were looking at in 2014, 15, I think, when but that's exactly right, yeah. Those rates do not support the cost for the new facility. They will help contribute towards it, but the costs are substantially higher than what was baked into that the study back in 2015. So what we've calculated... Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I apologize, yeah. Yeah, let me get through this real quick. Let me finish it up, and there'll be plenty of time for questions both here and afterwards. Oh, what the question was...
I was just basically saying that even that 2015 rate increase...
We just run the mic.
I think it's an important point to recognize that the 2015 rate increase was never going to be able to build anything of a wastewater treatment plant nature. It was the 2015 increase would raise $56 million. I mean, and even if you're going by a quote of $75 million for the plant, it was never going to build a plant because it was only going to raise $56 million. What can you build with $56 million? It wouldn't have served our needs.
I'm going to move on here, and I think there'll be plenty of time for questions, but just to cut to the chase on this chart here, the surcharge works out to be on top of the rates that are already adopted from 2015. For a single-family home, $41 a month is what the surcharge would total. And if we go on to the next slide, wherever the clicker is, okay. Yeah, this slide's showing what the all-in cost is, because that's something I know the city's been hearing a lot. Hey, what is my bill going to look like after these surcharges are phased in, after the rate increases have run their course? And, it varies. Obviously, the rates have some fixed components, and they've got some volumetric components. What we're showing here is the rates for different levels of use. On the left, you can see for someone who uses 1 unit of water per month. On the far right, it's someone who uses 10 units of water per month. And you can see right in the middle is 5 units. We're using that to kind of represent a typical single-family residential bill. When we look at your water use data, the average use in this community over the last year has been more like 4.5 units. So I imagine probably about 2/3 of the bills are going to be at 5 units per month or below. Or obviously, some people use a lot more, many use less. But the total bill, water, sewer, with this water reclamation facility surcharge, would be $191 per month for a single-family home using 5 units of water. We do. We have a report that's about to come out. We've done, want to show what the impacts are on a wide range of users is in there. And that's in our report, which is coming out on Monday, if we can get it completed on time. But that's, we're already partway there. The question was, is there a chart that shows what the impact is on businesses? So what we have in our study is impact on kind of a wide range of customers at different levels of use. And we're always happy. Maybe we can even make a kind of a calculator if someone wants to put in their numbers and their use and get a calculation of what their bill looks like. That'd be pretty easy to do. And
so next we're going to go to Scott Collins, the city manager, who's going to speak about the actions of the Blue Ribbon Commission in reviewing the rates. And then we'll be moving, just as a heads up to everybody, we're going to be moving on to some discussion about some critical choices that the council is going to be facing on Thursday, June 28th. So I encourage you to stay for that. You're actually going to have an opportunity to express your preferences. Obviously, this isn't a representative sample of the community, but it's important you spent the time to learn about this and get educated on the information. And the city would value your input on some of the choices that are coming up to factor in along with what the advisory bodies and all provide. So we'll be having a dot voting exercise at the end for you to express your preferences on those topics. So stick with us. We'll be on time.
Okay. Great. Yeah, so Morro Bay is blessed with a high rate of volunteerism. In addition to that, people who have a lot of expertise in a variety of areas. I've been surprised. Artists, engineers, pilots, people who've run, have been CEOs, run companies just across the board. We have some Hollywood Illuminatis as well. It's pretty amazing what we have in this community of 10,000 people. We're pretty lucky that way. And in the 6 months that I've been here, and going back 3 months that I've been here, I started to realize we are blessed with a lot of people with finance and business expertise. People who know a lot more about it than I do, their staff does, and that we really could tap into that expertise. Folks who've been here also a long time and understand this community, understand, the pressures that a rate increase like this would have on our community members. We don't want to see things change. We don't want to see our community turn over, in essence, because of our wastewater project. That's not a good outcome. So I engaged with folks who I spent some time with, folks who are on the Citizen Finance Advisory Committee, other folks who have served on those before, someone who has been involved in the hotel industry, and just have a very deep understanding of the community, but also of numbers. Like I said, Jen and I have a pretty good understanding, but if you can bring 4 other minds, brilliant minds to the table, along with our program manager and Alex Handlers, who's our rate consultant, you get a better product at the end of the day, because they spent, I don't know how many hours with us, probably 8 meetings, 3 hours, that's 20 some odd hours. And then they had their own meetings together individually as well, so they collectively probably spent several hundred hours working on this and really fine-tuning the rates and questioning all of the assumptions, looking at how much we can realistically invest in things like water and sewer capital. That was a question that's come up about the 2015 rates. There was discussions about how much we could actually afford, but also pushback from staff saying, well, there's things that absolutely have to be done. And if we don't stay on a regular schedule of CIP replacements, we're going to hit another massive increase in the future. So a lot of really good dialogue around finding a balance of rates, but also making sure that we can actually get the work done and that we don't have to come back in a couple of years and ask for more money. That would be a terrible outcome. So really good dialogue. And so the Blue Ribbon Commission's mission was really to help review the process and provide an independent recommendation to me regarding creating equitable and reasonable consumer rates with regard to water and sewer. Next slide, please. So the Blue Ribbon Commission, after spending all that time and challenging the assumptions and working the numbers, the basic outcome is that they believe that rate is reasonable. I think staff would agree with that, considering where we were last year with the initial project estimate of $167 million. The rate that was associated with that was over $240 a month, which is out of reach for a lot of people. So this is a better outcome. $191 a month is still a lot of money, no doubt, but certainly a better outcome. The commission felt there were other opportunities for savings with this project. Most immediate is negotiating with the Black and Veatch Felonk proposal on the facility itself. We believe that we can realize those savings even if we move forward with this rate, because the city's council will be asked pretty soon to adopt a policy around rate review every year. So that means looking at our expenditures and our revenues, how much money is coming in, how much is going out, and if we get a reduction in the scope of the project, or if we receive grants, or if we receive state revolving fund low interest loan financing, that's going to bring down the expenditure side. And council can make the decision at that point whether they want to reduce the rates or put more money into capital. So those are, we still feel confident with the numbers that we have now, and moving forward on the timeline that we talked about earlier today seemed appropriate. And related to that, the Blue Ribbon Commission felt we should authorize a contract with GSI Water Solution to refine the specifics around potable reuse, potentially reducing the cost. Great point, because we may determine that groundwater can only accept 600 acre foot per year instead of 600 versus 800, and there may be a corresponding savings not only in the injection system, but a corresponding savings up at the facility itself, and maybe reducing the size of the facility itself. Again, those are things that we can determine as we go forward and come back to council and see if we need to adjust the rates accordingly, because we've reduced millions of dollars off the project. The Blue Ribbon Commission also felt it was appropriate for the debt service of the wharf to show up as a line item on your bill, so you know how much that is costing you, and that once it's paid off, that maybe potentially that could come off of your bill. So we are looking for public input kind of on the issue of whether it should be on the tax roll or it should be on your monthly bill. The advisory bodies will look at that on Monday. Council will look at that on Thursday of next week. So we're just seeking more input about that. So some choices that not only do you have today in the advisory bodies on Monday and council on Thursday is really around billing options. It's common for water and sewer agencies to put either a portion or in their entire system on the property tax roll. There are some considerations around that. If it's all on the tax roll, or if the entire wharf surcharge is on the tax roll as opposed to on the monthly bill, it shifts the responsibility of the property owner away from the ratepayer. There's potentially less impact on renters. In some agreements between renters and landlords, the landlord assumes the bill. We don't know how many cases they are, so it's kind of undetermined at this point, but that's just one consideration. But if you do put it on the tax roll, you do get those balloon payments twice a year. And in addition, if you have part of your sewer water is being paid one place and another, it's not necessarily the most transparent or easy to understand. So those are some other considerations. If we put the wharf back one more, sorry. Oops, one more. If we do place it on the monthly water and sewer bill, the renters who do pay utilities would bear the full impact of the wharf surcharge. But again, by doing it this method, you do have more clear understanding of the total sewer and water costs. Next slide. And we'll also want to get an understanding from the folks here today, as well as the advisory bodies on Monday and council on Thursday, about implementation of rate increases. Our assumption about the 191 figure assumes in 2019-20 we will go from where we are, we'll be at the end of this year, up to 191. So we call that front loading. And as Alex explained, that means you have more cash on hand. You don't have to take on as much debt ultimately for the project. So you will be at 191 in perpetuity unless there's a change in the future. The other option is to phase in the rate increases, so you don't go to 191 immediately. The first year you go up to 161, the next year 172, the next year 183, and then actually 194. You'll be a little bit higher, and then you'll be at the 194 rate in perpetuity unless there's a change made. So those are options that not only will council and the advisory bodies have, but we are actually looking to get input from the participants here today to understand kind of what they believe is the right methodology moving forward.
Okay. So we've got a number of questions that have come in. Let me just also check how many other people have questions in addition to the ones that were written. Okay, we've got one in the back. Okay, and just to get a read, how many people would like to make a public comment about this topic? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that'll work just fine. Let me cover the questions that got submitted, then we'll go to the question in the back, and then we'll have public comment, and then we'll move to the dot voting exercise for everyone to express their preferences here. So here's a question. Because people will be trying to keep this new rate as low as possible by reducing water usage, will there be less money coming in than expected? How do you deal with price elasticity of demand, I guess you economists would say? And that's a question for Alex Handlers from Bardo Wells, the independent rate consultant.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the concept, as the price for water rises, there's more disincentive, so people cut back use. Two things are happening. One is this communities, around, same with the rest of the agencies around California, you're coming out of a drought where water use had come down substantially, so we're kind of coming off a low point and seeing a little bit of a rebound. Water's never going to go back to where it used to go, but it could go a little higher than where it is right now. So you're dealing with kind of an upward trend coming out of a drought, coupled with potential downward impacts of additional rates. We assumed that the water use would stay flat at current levels in our assumptions. We didn't build any additional elasticity. Also keep in mind that these charges they're fixed surcharges that would be going, whether it's in the bill or on the tax rolls, regardless of how much water you use. The debt service is a fixed charge that the city's going to have to pay for a number of years. So it's fixed charges on the residential side. On the commercial side, it's almost impossible to come up with a good way of trying to levy fixed charges. You've got a restaurant over here, one that's only open 2 days a week, the other one's open 3 meals, 5 days a week. So pretty common for many rates is to have a fixed residential charge, and with a reduced charge for multifamily dwelling units. And on the commercial side, it's a volumetric charge based on water use. So the more you use, the more you pay. If you're a big hotel versus if you're a small business, the impacts would be a little different. So it's a little different on both sides, but we're not anticipating that these surcharges are going to have a huge significant difference in the water use. Again, there are times we do build in elasticity, but just due to the fact you're coming out of the drought, we kind of assumed a level baseline. But you're going to evaluate. You never know what water use is going to be. That's kind of a wild card. What's going to happen is, assuming you get rates in place to secure financing for this facility and everything goes forward as however the council and the community decide, you're going to come back again in future years and reevaluate and take a look. And in 5 years, you reevaluate, and maybe everything's good for a number of years more. But certainly, if there's been a hit to the revenues, or if there's good things that have happened, you can always adjust course as needed down the line. But keep in mind that these are fixed charges because the debt service is fixed for many years. So even if things do go awry with your water sales and somehow new operating costs, new regulations get foisted upon the city, we don't anticipate that after these rates are in place, there's anything significant in the future. You have a pay-as-you-go funding stream for capital, you're covering your O&M, and you're paying the debt service. So hopefully you'll be set for a pretty long time with what's being proposed. Oh, about elasticity? Yeah, but it's not a lot less money because these surcharges are fixed charges on the residential side. So you're right. If commercial use goes down 10%, maybe you're getting a few percent less dollars out there. That's always a possibility.
But you can't affect your own bill by using less water.
Well, you can because your water rates already have a lot of volumetric charges built into those. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, can you impact your own bill, based on your own personal level of water use? So if you keep your water use down, is your bill going to be lower? And the answer is yes, that's already built into your water rates. There's a substantial volumetric charges and tiered rates with conservation incentive built in there, but not on the sewer rates and not on these surcharges. Because they're fixed charges, you need kind of a reliable revenue stream in order to secure financing. If this was a completely variable charge and your revenues to pay for these facilities are subject to go up and down with droughts and other things, it just weakens your credit profile. And being able to demonstrate both to the WIFIA program, State Revolving Fund program, and the bond market, if you need to go there as well, you need to demonstrate you've got a pretty secure funding stream that's going to meet their muster as well. So there's already a lot of conservation incentive built into the rates. This doesn't add really any more conservation incentive except to some degree on the commercial side.
Just to kind of follow up on that too, the council just passed the reserve policy for the enterprise funds, and a component of that is an O&M reserve. So if usage starts to go down, we can monitor the budgets, let Joe and Rob know they need to stop spending money, and then we can come forward to council and offer up some of that reserve money as a kind of temporary gap instead of doing anything with rates. So that was, one piece of that, passing that reserve policy was to have that stabilization.
Okay. So while Alex is up there, you might have a point of comparison about the affordability question. There are two questions here. I think you might be able to respond to them. How does a small town of 10,000 plus ever afford a $128 million, or 126, I guess it is now, facility? And how do these rates that are coming out, maybe you could, Jen, could you take back to a couple slides, the one that has the graph on it based on use? There you go. So I think that responds to the lady's question about if you were at 5 units and you dropped down, you'd be further, your cost would be less, and you could move it around based on that. But how do these rates that you're looking at up here compare with what you're seeing in other communities that are taking on new projects and trying to fund them, at this stage?
Yeah, I mean, certainly they're higher than many agencies I've worked for, but on the other side of the coin, they're lower than others. You're right, this is an expensive project for a population that's, pretty small here. When we look at the other coastal communities, you guys are currently in the lower middle range. If you start comparing to, you've got Cambria, you've got Los Osos, Cayucos has already stepped ahead of you. You're going to probably have to go higher than them when this is all phased in. But you're looking at a bill, again, probably about 2/3 of the customers are going to pay, $191 a month at that 5-unit level when all the rates are fully implemented. I work with a lot of agencies that have, we're seeing sewer rates in many agencies now, $80, $100 a month. Again, what you're going through is something that many communities are facing, or some are ahead of you, in having to rebuild treatment plants and stuff. So unfortunately, it would be nice if the cost could be amortized over 20,000 people instead of 10,000. But we're just dealing with the reality of what we're looking at. The other thing I want to say is with the rate comparisons, it's helpful for informational purposes. You want to see what someone else is doing, but it really doesn't have a lot of meaning from my perspective because it's always apples and oranges. You go to some communities that it may be not on the coast, subject to coastal commission permit requirements. They have different permit requirements. Maybe they've got a water supply. They don't have to pay for the state water project. They can just put a well in the ground and pump at their convenience. So every agency's got to fund its own financial needs with its rates. And there's been a good effort here to really identify what those funding needs are. There's a new capital program that looks into the details of what needs to be done and what the priorities are. We know what the operating costs are. There's operating cost projections for the treatment plant. So, I almost don't care what other agencies do, but you're going to find that, yeah, you're higher than some, and you're certainly going to be lower than others, like your neighbor Los Osos.
Okay, so one of the questions is, and I think this is for Jen and for Alex, why can't the city simply save money from the 2015 rate increases until it has enough to do what it wants? Why is there a need to add more funding through rates?
So I think it was brought up earlier that the 2015 rate increase was going to fund about $56 million. So even if we defer the project for several years, we're going to get $56 million. We don't have a rate in place that will fund a $123 or $126 million project. What did happen, though, is because capital has been deferred as we've been doing the One Water plan, there was some built-in capital into that rate, and that's helped us accumulate more funds so we can do more pay-go and finance less for this new project or the project that ends up moving forward. So you've already paid towards the development of the wharf, you've paid towards some capital, and that's all going to help lower the financing amount at the end of the day and reduce the rate.
Yeah, it would take you a long time. I mean, if you think you're... I just want to point out, the current rates are providing some funding toward the project, so that money is being used. The city does have a little bit of reserves that have been accrued. They're going to be put to the project, as well as some annual funding to do some pay-as-you-go to reduce what the financing needs are. But if you just kept those rates in place and didn't adopt the surcharge, it's going to be many, many years before you're going to have the revenue stream to support the facility. And guess what? You're going to miss your permit deadlines. You've got about 5 years to get this stuff done. The project costs are going to continue to escalate. Construction cost inflation has been, higher than what people think of CPI. So I don't know, be many, many years until you eventually got there.
Okay. All right. And there's a question here about comparing the cost of this plant with what Cayucas is building. I think that was addressed earlier. If you've got a question about that, Eric was responding to that earlier, and he can follow up with you if there was something in his response that you wanted to clarify further. So what we're going to do now is there is a question in the back. So if you please come up, state your name, and offer your question. Then we'll take we'll take the public comments. It looked like there was just a handful, and then we'd like to really get these dots in your hands so you can make some choices and put some things up there to do that.
Bart Beckman, Morro Bay. First, relative to a statement, which I would call an opinion earlier, and that's that the $75 million really wasn't intended to actually build a wastewater treatment plant. Well, I would take exception to that. If it is true, is it still true today that the $126 million is really not intended to build this plant? Because that would logically be the same kind of thing. Secondly, I'd heard talk about possibly looking at a 35-year loan versus 30. I'm assuming this is 30, which I would certainly go for, but I don't know. I didn't find anywhere in the literature if it said 35 versus 30, so if you can confirm that. The last 218 and 215, I'm sorry, had $16 million in addition to the 75, and there was also sort of $25 million placeholder for water reclamation, but relative to the $16 million, there's a somewhat equivalent of $12 million for what's called on the slide CIP, but apparently it's also reserves. It's capital improvement projects and reserves. Is it 12 million? Anyway, there's 12 million. I would encourage Scott to basically manage that expenditure. I'm assuming it's over the next 5 years. The last 16 million was clearly not managed particularly well or kept track of, and it sort of went into the ether, is now being used as a reason why the cost is not going up as much. For example, the $3.5 million for the automated meters. And the last item is relative to the sewer repairs. I'm going to go against sort of the numbers game here. The 8 million gallons a day or something like that, 7 or 8 million I think you talked about, that's highly skewed by the water leakage into the pipes. I would personally like to see, let's spend some more money up front to repair those pipes and possibly look at the design points. How much could we bring that design point down if we fixed some of the pipes? There's got to be a correlation there, because the rationale for why we're so much higher than Cayucas is because of that issue. So if we could bring that down, it certainly seems like let's spend some more money on sewer repairs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we'll take public comments and then give an opportunity for staff to respond with any factual information they can offer to help. Meanwhile, I'm just preparing your ballot up here for your dot exercise if you're wondering what I'm doing.
Hey, Kerrigan Mahan, Morro Bay. I just want to kind of generally speak to, in following with Bart, I have to mirror everything he said and asked. I think the biggest concern I have, generally speaking, because again, I can't get into the weeds with all of the numbers and the technology, but what I can do and do observe and note is it's like a bad version of Groundhog Day from the standpoint that we're really playing around with huge numbers here. We were 167, we were 150, and now we're 123. However many years ago, we were 30-something, then we were 75. We're throwing around tens of millions of dollars like they were $20 bills. I have been perplexed by this for over a year. The fact that I don't think South Bay is our best choice and all of the expense that goes along with South Bay, I don't agree with. Joe, with all due respect to the current plant, you know the stuff. You know, can it be fixed for 10 or 20 million? Probably. Does it need to be replaced ultimately? Yes. As far as the Coastal Commission goes, we dealt with the Coastal Commission in 2013, and we keep kind of dropping the aspect that our mayor asked for the denial. And with all due respect to him, I think a lot of that had to do with the citizens wanted the denial at the time. So there's a lot of things that are just kind of not being addressed or remaining kind of undisclosed. And we keep doing the same kind of thing with the charts. And by the way, I'm very impressed with the graphic. Whoever does the graphics overnight, this stuff, it's like the Kentucky Derby. I'm heading out here today to see 128 million, and we're down before I turn around. Before I leave the house, we're at 126. It's really amazing. It's like an odds race. What price is the sewer going off at tomorrow? So these are just genuine concerns. I mean, you know, Walter, with all due respect to you, sir, what can a measly $56 million build? Well, I'd like to think it can build quite a bit. And, you know, I guess I'll end it with the reticence that we have seen from the very beginning to the PERC plant, the company PERC, and there's another, there are multiple companies, All-American something, and they do these, and our fellow citizen David Nelson has spoken to this 150 times, and his frustration, I feel. You know, all of these numbers can go down. We're doing this based on 120, 130, 150, 167, depending on, you know, what consultant we're using. I mean, we were pretty hosed, I think. We don't need to yeah, we're going to name him Nunley and Rickenbach. I mean, that was a show. That was a good show. I dealt with a producer some years ago that they were that good. He was that good. That's how good they were. They were really good. Hopefully they're gone. What do we spend on them? $4 or $5 million of good money. So
that's your 3 minutes.
Well, that's all right. I got my 3 minutes worth. Thank you very much. I think this is a good thing today. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. So we have public comment. Let me just again get the hands raised of how many there are in the public comment. Okay, we want to be sure to give you time for the dot voting. Do we have people who feel like they can make their comment in, we'll do it sort of by auction here in a minute. Who would like to do one in a minute? We'll have a minute, 2 minutes, or 3 minutes. You get your choice, but if you take a minute, you're first. Going for 2 minutes? Okay, we've got two for 2 minutes, so come on up. We'll take the two with 2 minutes.
Hi, Walter Heath, resident of Morro Bay. I received a packet of information at my doorstep yesterday, and the first item on it was water and sewer rates were increased in 2015 and we're supposed to fund a new $75 million plant. Well, I'm learning today that Morro Bay's water and sewer increase would have covered a $56-57 million plant. So right out of the gate, this is a half-truth. It was dependent upon 18 to 19 million coming from Cayucas. And so that never was intended to fund a $75 million plant. And knowing what I know about the history of this, that $75 million number was pretty much picked out of the sky. I heard it referred to, I think it was in relation to what Cayucas was paying for their plant at the time. So it was never really a reliable engineering estimate. So the underlying premise that we don't need a water rate increase is basically disparaged by the first statement coming out of this document. Of course, we were going to need to have a water rate increase in order to build the $75 million plant that we were supposedly promised. So there are numerous inaccuracies all through this document, but it starts with the very first sentence. So I view this really as a public disservice at this point.
Thank you. So Aaron was next, and then we'll, with 2 minutes.
I'm going to take my 1 minute.
You're going to take 1 minute?
Yeah.
Okay.
Steve Stevens, and I just want to respond to that specific comment. And I'm concerned primarily about the credibility of the city. I know that everybody has made their best effort. This is a fact sheet from the city of Morro Bay. Quote, the proposed maximum rates provide adequate revenue to build a WWTP without Cayucas. Were Cayucas to rejoin the Morro Bay project, sewer rates, and if this will come back here, supporting the construction of the WWTP would be lower than if Morro Bay builds without Cayucas, even though construction costs without Cayucas would be less. This is the city of Morro Bay that has come out with that fact sheet. So when you talk about misleading statements, the city of Morro Bay, in good faith, came out with that. So that is the basis for statements that have been made here. The city of Morro Bay fact sheet.
Thank you for your comment.
My name is Bob Keller, Morro Bay. I'm up here to stop fighting the Coastal Commission. We've been fighting them since 2003. And if we keep moving like going backwards, we're going to be fighting them another 10 years. So first of all, then that'll keep our costs down if we stop fighting them. Another thing, too, is funding is our key issue. I think if we just concentrate on getting more funding for this project, it would help our ratepayers. And that would be the project manager's primary job right now, to research any and every agency out there that would give funding to the city of Morro Bay, which is the most beautiful city on the coast of the state of California. You could probably go all the way to the state capitol and ask Jerry Brown. He might even help us out. You'd be surprised, because we have a beautiful town here, and we don't have the money to do this, so we make it help. You'd be surprised. So that, another factor too is we could, if the cost is going to be, we should maybe, this is a capital improvement. We should maybe put this on our property taxes, because it's separate of water. And people that use water and sewer, capital improvement is separate. That's the way I feel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Aaron, I think you were next with 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, residents, staff, council members. My name is Aaron Oakes of Save Morro Bay. We just learned that the proposed rate is now $191 per month, and we were told that rate is reasonable. Let me tell you, it is not reasonable at all. That $191 million comes after 5 years of project delays by your council and by your staff. In 2013, our mayor promised that the cost would be $12 to $20 million more to move the plant inland. And at that time, I said, go for it. 5 years now, $191 a month at around $128 million for the plant. Staff tells us it's reasonable. It's not. And I want to address some few points that Mr. Heath mentioned. And I respectfully disagree with some of his comments. For one thing, back in 2015, Mr. Heath repeatedly supported the Proposition 218 increases. And at the time, he didn't say that it was pie in the sky engineer estimate. He said, and I quote, guaranteed maximum cost based on the Morro Bay fact sheet. But now he says, 2018, wow, I just realized that we can't pay for a plant at $56 million. So get your facts right and stay in your lane, Mr. Heath.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have any others that seek 2 minutes? Yes, come on up. And the person who's next with seeking 2 minutes, if you just come up to the side, that would be great. We'll be able to get you next in line.
Jeff Heller, Morro Bay. I think for me, the project at this point is more about broken promises than the projected rates. And by broken promises, I mean, I was naive enough in 2015 to believe this. Now I'm hearing tonight that a lot of people don't believe it, saying it wasn't intended to build anything. Well, that's very true because nothing has been built, but we've been paying rates increases for 3 years. Then I'm being told that the One Water study is rolling over some of the projects that was supposed to be done with this money into their rate study. Isn't that paying for the same thing twice? It is to me. Secondly, how can a $167 million project estimate go to less than $130 million in less than 6 months? That's 25% of the scope of the work removed. Okay, I know you took out a little building, but is that worth $40 million? I have no confidence in the estimates. How can it be? How can you take out one building and save $40 million? If the citizens had not been opposing the $167 million, would we be paying rates for a $167 million project right now? Probably. How low can the cost go? I think it can go a lot lower. We had bids from sewer contractors who could build us what we needed for less than $50 million. And that's where we need to go. Let's be honest about this. It's not about the rates. It's about the leadership and management of this project, from the consultants, to staff, the council, and the mayor.
Thank you for your comment. Next.
Good afternoon, council, staff, Mr. Maruska, fellow residents. My name is Glenn Silloway. I'm a resident of Morro Bay. First, I'd like to thank you for putting this event on. I think you did a great job. And you provided a lot of information that's complex. It's fairly clear. I like the way you did it. I know it leaves questions. And I know that there will be further changes because this is a big, complex project. But what we have got to now is a place where, for the first time, we have gone through extensive analysis by lots of eyes and lots of qualified people to get to a place where we have a good estimate based on sound engineering principles and analysis. It is not a Cal pie-in-the-sky, wishful thinking proposal. If Cal actually had a plan that they could price with engineering done, I would love to see it. They haven't provided it. Let me say, one thing that you did today was clear up some numbers. The $300 rate per month. This is something Cal put on people's doorsteps. Your rate's going to be $300 a month. When they wrote this on June 9th, they already knew that wasn't true. The $75 million, it is in the document, in the rate study at the time, that that would be a $56 to $57 million for Morro Bay. That's a fact. One of the ones that really bothers me the most, this is item number 7. The existing plant meets all federal and state water quality requirements 98% of the time. False. As Joe pointed out today, the full secondary standards are 30-30. I've looked at our performance over the last 5 years closely. We very seldom meet that 30-30. The current plant is not designed to do that. The pie in the sky that Cal is selling is that we can go back to the Coastal Commission and get them to do what we want. That's rolling the dice. It's a risky plan. The only evidence we have, actually, in writing and in experience with the Coastal Commission, is that they do not want a plant on the beach. And anything we do to improve or replace that plant will require a coastal development permit from the Coastal Commission. It's a non-starter.
Thank you for your comment. Next person. State your name, please, and residence. Thank you. Now you're
Hi.
speaking for the 2 minutes?
Yeah, I'll do 2.
Okay.
Well, is there anybody else going to speak? I'll do 3 if there's nobody. I'll do 3. Okay?
Okay.
Hi, Marla J. Sadowski, North Morro Bay. I just would like to inform the residents and the city staff that in 2016, Assembly Bill 2616 was passed, and it's called Environmental Justice Policy Act. That Environmental Justice Act has to do with environmental challenges coming before the state of California residents, having to do with climate change and migration of peoples, the things that are going to be happening with droughts and extreme heat and what have you. Right now, the Coastal Commission, California Coastal Commission, as well as the State Water Board and the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board have initiated environmental justice policy at those agencies. I do not believe that the city of Morro Bay has at all attempted to walk up and present Morro Bay's case to those agencies. Right now, we have the regional board telling us one thing: all we need is secondary treatment. They don't care where the plant is, although they are coming out and supporting South Bay Boulevard to the point that they've threatened individuals with more fines and things if we don't pass the 218 vote, which I believe is threatening our legal right to vote without being intimidated, when that agency only needs secondary treatment. Think about what's happening to us. Have we gone back to the Coastal Commission and asked them about the Hansen site that's above the floodplain? Have we gone back and done that? No. We just keep hearing in 2013 they denied a permit. Well, that permit was for a plant that was moved closer to the beach and lower in elevation. That was the site that was denied a permit. Yes, it was, Mr. Soloway. Yes, it was. I was there. Were you? You were? When did you start following it?
This is public comment, so don't have
Okay, I've been
dialogue
following
here.
this since 2003, all right? I think I know what I'm talking about. I just find that we have been failed by our leadership. They are not going out there and stepping up for our community. We have 3 separate zones in our community that are considered 2 underprivileged areas and
Thank
one
you.
severely underprivileged
That's your 3
area.
minutes, ma'am. Thank you.
They're not addressing that, and it's wrong.
So I think we have one more speaker, do we? Is that correct, for 3 minutes? Is there anyone else, or has everyone spoken that wishes to speak? Okay. We'll go back to the staff then. And staff, are there any particular comments or questions that were asked that you would like to provide some factual clarification?
I think we have a few. First, Bart, you asked about the length of the financing. WIFIA, the assumption for WIFIA is 35 years. For the bond piece of it is 30 years. We don't have the SRF, but that can go up to 35 years as well. The 30 for SRF, sorry. But the bond piece is 30 and WIFIA is 35 in the rate assumption. And Alex can speak clearly to that in a minute as well. You also asked about managing the reserves or the cash that we have on hand. That's going to be part of the rate policy, annual rate review policy. It's going to be our responsibility and working with Scott to come back to the council and the community, really with each quarterly report, but as part of that annual reserve or annual rate review to show you what we've spent, what we accumulated, what we said we were going to spend that money on, and what we did spend it on. So that's the direction moving forward as we get through 18-19.
Thanks, Jen. Oh, thanks. There were a couple of questions here that I'd written down that I wanted to address. The first one has to do with the fixing the I&I to help reduce costs. So I think that, as Rob had stated earlier, done our best to to trim down the capital improvement program on the sewer side outside of the WRF as much as is reasonable to help fund the WRF project. But we are continuing to focus on the most critical projects that need to be done in the collection system, which are targeted at reducing I&I. Just a little bit about how that may impact the cost of the project. Unfortunately, I&I is not necessarily what drives the sizing for treatment facilities. Oh, excuse me, inflow and infiltration. So we're talking about the impacts of stormwater on sewer flows. So either there are direct connections, as Rob had mentioned before, of storm drain connections directly into the sewer system, or because of offset joints or cracks or those kinds of things, water gets into the sewer lines when the water table gets high and during rain events. Unfortunately, treatment facilities are not necessarily sized based on that peak flow. There are certain aspects that are designed on that peak flow, but really what we're looking at and what drives the cost for these facilities is kind of the day in and day out average flow that the treatment plant has to treat, right? What may be impacted by reducing I&I would be potentially reducing the size of the force main that needs to go from the existing site out to South Bay Boulevard. Say that goes from a 16-inch or an 18-inch pipe to a 16-inch pipe. The vast majority of the cost is already sunk in the trenching for that pipeline and all those other things. In terms of the lift station, you may have some little bit larger pumps, but for the most part, the lift station would be sized about the same as it would if we were to reduce I&I. So I&I it's prudent to reduce I&I as much as possible. It'll help Joe in terms of his operations. The big thing is it'll help with long-term O&M costs in terms of reducing the pumping costs, the amount of flow you have to pump, less energy, and everything else. So that's kind of how I&I fits into the picture. The other one had to do with some other design build outfits that are out there. American Water, PERC, those are a couple that were mentioned. The city went through a process. They selected several years ago a design build process. That's how they were going to procure the entity that was going to design and construct the on-site facilities. It was kind of a three-step process even, because before the statement of the request for qualifications was sent out to the larger public, they solicited letters of interest from different people. Those firms that were mentioned, they had every opportunity to participate in that process. And to my knowledge, the folks that were just talked about never submitted a letter of interest to the city to participate in the process, never submitted a statement of qualifications, and so they never actively participated in that process that they had the opportunity to participate. Why the reduced costs? There's a couple reasons. I think the big one, going from $150 million down to $126 million, is we were using an estimate for the on-site facilities, an estimated cost. That cost has now been realized. We have a guaranteed cost from the design build entity that we've identified as the preferred proposer. And so that $69-odd million number that was put forward in the staff report for the previous council meeting, that represented about an $86 or $89 million piece of capital that we had built into that $150 million. So luckily, the cost was estimated sufficiently such that when we got the actual hard cost, it came back within the estimate and lower than the estimate. So that's where the savings are coming. And then another couple $1 million of savings recently has come from the decision to move out the demolition for the project and not necessarily fund it right away and figure out how to fund it in the future, or to fund it with any contingency funds or reserve funds that aren't spent on the treatment plant itself. So that's kind of the difference in cost. I think those were the only ones that I had to answer. Rob, did you have any that you wanted to cover?
I think you covered those.
Yeah, there was one about the regional board, I believe, in terms of what their goal is, and I think that was an accurate statement that was made. Is I think that the regional board cares about both the regional board and coastal commission are kind of siloed in what they care about, right? The regional board cares that the discharge permits or the discharge regulations that they dictate are met, and those can be met with a facility located on the coast, located 10 miles inland, located 50 miles inland, whatever the community needs to do in order to meet those discharge regulations. And the coastal commission is more concerned about the location of those facilities. So each of them has their own kind of drivers for the project.
Okay, so we're almost at the 4:30 time. What I want to do now is turn your attention to a couple key decisions for the council to make. You'll recall that the city manager, Scott Collins, mentioned to you that there are two of them, billing options for the WRF surcharge. Is it placed on the property tax, or is it placed on the monthly water and sewer bills? He shared with you some of the considerations around that. A second one is with regard to the implementation of the rate increases. Implement them full rate increase in the first year, or do you phase in over time? Again, recognizing, as I think the staff mentioned several times today, that the city has an annual review process on the rates, so they'll be continually adjusting those as they go forward. Did you have a further comment on that, Scott, before I turn them to the voting?
Yes, real quick. So if you're a member of advisory body, Blue Ribbon and Commission aside, because they're not appointed by council, but if you're a member of the advisory body or you're a council member, you can't participate in the dot exercise, because that would, I believe, be a Brown Act violation if we can't identify which dot belonged to which advisory body member or council member. So just out of an abundance of caution, because there's been a lot of questions about the Brown Act, I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Okay. And just before we turn to that, there was one other question that I didn't want to overlook, and that was a question asking for some clarification with regard to the revisions to the ballot for the Prop 218, and if the city attorney might speak to that, please.
Yes, the question was asking about the resolution that the council adopted last meeting regarding the policy, the 218 protest policy, as well as the ballot. That resolution has been finalized. It was approved with amendments, and those amendments have been incorporated and has been signed, and it's available at City Hall. And the ballot will be part of the notice that's provided to the citizens for the protest, and that notice will be going to the council. I'm not sure when the notice will be going to the council, but when we have the 218 authorized by the council, the vote to start, that ballot will be going to the council then.
Okay. So.
I'm sorry, that was my question.
Yes.
I don't feel it's been answered completely.
Okay.
Will the public be able to see it, like the resolution and the ballot?
You'll be able to see the ballot now if you want. You can ask the city clerk for a copy of it. You can also ask the city clerk for a copy of the resolution.
That cover your question? Yes. Super. Okay, great. So what we have an opportunity for you to do now is to express your preferences on these two. So we're going to have the following opportunity for you. Again, so if you'll use in terms of source of funds on the billing option, that'll be green. So I'm putting a green up there. Over on the implementation of the rate increases, you get one choice, A or B. So place your dots on the options that you prefer for this. And I'll be up here at the front. Maybe the staff can help me hand out some dots here. I'll be making them available. Was there something you wish to say beforehand?
I'm sorry. Whoops. I just want to clarify what the phase-in means here. If the surcharge would phase in, already there's going to be no charge this upcoming fiscal year. Either the charge would be for $41 for single-family home, or it would phase in over 4 years, approximately like 10, 20, 30, 40. So that's what I know the slide there kind of showed the total combined bill for a typical home, but so that's what they're looking at, a $40 monthly surcharge or 10, 20, 30, 40. Just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Okay, thank you very much. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to put the green dots over near this option. The question here on billing options, where's the money coming from? So green is where the money is coming from. Put one on A or on B, as you see would best serve the city. And then we have orange dots over on another chair here at the other poster on what you think would best serve the community in terms of the implementation of the rates. Whether they would hit, you were clarifying, Alex, whether they would begin in 2020 at the full amount, or whether they would begin in a phase-in starting in 2020 over time. So that with that clarification, everybody clear? So if you're not a council member or an advisory board member, you have the opportunity to come up and place your dots. Do you have a question about the process, sir? Yes, question about the property tax. So we're just trying to get some clarification so everybody's voting, So we're trying to get a microphone over here. So for your question. Yes, sir?
I'm saying if it's placed on the property tax, do renters who are not property owners get to vote?
If it's on the so Joe, a clarification. If it's on the property tax bill, then it would be the parcel owner who would be voting, not necessarily the renter who didn't own the property. Is that correct?
If the customers are not going to be responsible for paying the bill, then the customers won't be provided an opportunity to vote.
Thank you. So with that clarification, we invite you to come up. If you're not a council member or an advisory board member, we can't have you voting here, but otherwise we invite you to come, take one dot for each choice, and provide your input on how you'd like these questions to be resolved. We're recognizing that you're not a representative sample of the community, but you've invested your afternoon here to learn about these topics, and we want to thank you for that and give you the opportunity to express your preferences up here. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're so glad that you're here. There's an open opportunity for you to talk with staff over here or at any of the information stations to get further clarification on the topics that have come up today. I want to thank Morro Bay for coming out here and being such good citizens and concerned about your community. Thanks for joining us.